Good evening. We've got a full house with a whole bunch of people out in the hall waiting to get in. So if you would just take a moment to silence your cell phones, teenagers. Actually, it's usually the adults that are offenders because they don't know how to silence their cell phones. And then please rise for a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to begin our evening with some fun items. We're going to recognize the City of Asheville Youth Leadership Academy, Kayla, and I'm forgetting how we do this every year, but I'm going to have Erica come up. We're going to bring it, but like, did we do it one All right. So tonight we have the pleasure of recognizing our Kayla students, our class of 2017. And just to give a little background on the Kayla program, let me talk about that for just a minute. 9 years ago, the Asheville City Council envisioned a new program that would place students with meaningful summer internships with city departments and partnering organizations throughout Asheville. This program would empower its students to get involved in our community, support them in their quest for college, and reward them with a generous scholarship. After a rigorous application process each spring, 25 Kayla students are placed in prestigious summer internships that allow them to explore careers and learn from caring adult professionals. Members of the Kayla class of 2017 interned with valuable community partners including Habitat for Humanity, Care Partners, and the Omni Grove Park Inn. Each Friday during the summer, the students attended day-long leadership workshops that focused on social entrepreneurship. Students learned about the triple bottom line that considers a company's social, economic, and environmental impact. The students also met with business professionals whose passions have led to the creation of local social enterprises and took a variety of field trips to see such careers in action. Of the graduating seniors, all have been accepted to colleges. Clap, clap, clap. So we have a rule that you're not allowed to clap in here, but I just let you break the rule because this is so exciting. And many have earned significant merit scholarships, including the UNC Asheville Avid Scholars Award, the Golden Door Scholarship, and the Civitan and Rotary Scholarships. This year, the total merit scholarship money earned by Kayla students since 2008 will surpass $1.3 million. Wow. Beginning last June, the Kayla students began planning in-depth social justice projects. They organized the 6th annual MLK Youth Summit, which brought together more than 60 teenagers from all of Buncombe County's high schools to discuss issues of importance to youth. The Kayla students also taught a class each week for the Asheville City Schools Foundation's IRL After School program. Over the years, Kayla students have given more than 3,600 volunteer hours to our community. In recognition of their accomplishments and the critical role they play in Asheville's future, the City of Asheville awards each Kayla student a scholarship in the amount of $2,000. We are proud of the leadership that the Kayla students exhibit each day and look forward to hearing of their achievements in the years to come. So congratulations, and now we're going to recognize each of you.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure if we are all here, all 25 of us. I know 2 young men were en route, so hopefully if they're outside, we'll just pass these certificates. Right, and when we call your name, if you could come forward, please, and we're going to have you guys do form an arc behind me. Okay, so first, Candida Alas Ortega. Secret Allen. Isabel Arredondo. Angelique Ayode. Mercy Beveridge. Skip to Zoe Cecil. Karina Derry. Tanya Davila. Sedaria Davis. D'Angelo Elliott. And I think I'm just going to call Devin Boston with his bag.
Just in the nick of time.
And if I can grab Dana Campbell Jr. Come on up. All right, so back in order. Did we do Itzel yet? No, Itzel Garcia Ruiz. Itzel should be real close to that. Itzel Garcia Ruiz. I guess it's under R. Sorry, so. There we go. Itzel. And now Keenan Hines. Straight from track practice. All right. Erica Howard. Rihanna Innes. Shamon Jones. Ariana Moore. Myra Pearson. Let's see, do you guys want to start making a row behind me again? You want, okay. The birthday girl in the room, Jamie Rhodes. Jasmine Riddle. Sophia Rutherford. Angel Vasquez Ramirez. Zion Walker. And the 25th, last but not least, Ashley White.
And can you stand up if you're family or friends here for our Kayla students? Let's give a big round of applause for our family. Did everyone get a picture? Who wants a picture? Yeah, why don't we have them each come and tell us? Okay, if you are a graduating senior and you know where you're going to school and you want to tell us, could you come forward? Let's start on this end and work our way across and let everyone know where you're going to school.
I'm going to Winston-Salem State University.
I will be attending Queen's University of Charlotte in the fall.
I'll be attending Appalachian State University.
I'll be going to UNC Charlotte.
I'll be going to Western Carolina University.
I'll be attending Berry University.
I'll be attending Winston-Salem State University. I'll be attending University of Southern California.
I'm going to AV Tech for 2 years and then going to Western.
I will be attending Western Carolina University in the fall.
All right, congratulations to all of you. It's a really exciting night, and I hope you take a break once you're all done with all your work. I know the last day of school is June 9th, so work hard until then, and then have a great summer. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
That's what I like to hear from you. Right. What do you need? What do you need?
It's employee
What do you need, Esther?
It's not, I brought it down with me.
Did you look all
I brought
through?
it down there, so somebody's got it.
Oh, you handed it to somebody?
Okay, so the next thing.
Is employee recognition.
Oh, yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, the next item on our agenda is employee recognitions, and I'm going to turn it over to the city manager for that. Oh, by the way, if you're in the overflow room, we have plenty of room in here now. You can make your way upstairs.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to advance really 3 employee recognitions. The first one would be an abstention, Erica Germer.
She's on the hall.
Of course, she's with the Kayla group. Erica has made sure that this program has run from the get-go and is truly dedicated to the success of these young people. And I just want to point that out. We're very proud of each of the Kayla students and the graduates. Erica Germer, though, is the guiding light and the person that cares for them like a parent. And so we're indebted to her and fortunate to have her to keep the program going. The second recognition I want to do is the team that put together our public safety radio system. And for that purpose, I'd like to call the team forward, representatives of the team, and Wanda Burgess. Wanda is the support services manager. They're trying to get in. Come on in, Wanda. Wanda is the support services manager that does all the help service desk and keeps all the things going in the department. She is the best number 2 the department could possibly have. Very unsung hero as well. And she is filling in for Jonathan Feldman, who has a family emergency and is taking care of his parents at this time. we're in good hands with Wanda. And I'd like to turn it over to her to introduce the recipients of this recognition.
Hello, Council, and thank you so much for this opportunity to come and get to celebrate something that we've been working for 3 years on now. This project started in 2014. It was a $6 million project, and it was upgrading our radio infrastructure that was becoming aged and needed to be upgraded. We needed to bring it into compliance with our Homeland Security recommendations, and in order to do that, it allowed us to increase our interoperability with other public safety professionals across the local, city, and state and federal agencies. So we now have an enhanced interagency communications with Buncombe County Sheriff's Department, the State Highway Patrol, College Campus Police, regional fire departments, and other neighboring police agencies. This upgrade project was a complete success. It was managed through the IT Services Department by Jeff Revel, and there are several others that helped in making this a success, and it did come in on scope, under budget, and on time. So again, thank you for this opportunity to represent these and get some recognition. I'd like to call for Jeff Revel, who was the project manager. From the fire department, we had Captain Jeremy Edmonds and Norris Going. Asheville Police Department, we had Captain Gary Gudak, Dan Lemley, Boyd McCaskill, Kathy Trimnell, Joy Griffin, and Lieutenant Bill Wilkie. From our IT department, of course, Jeff, and then Tim Reimers, Stephen Fry. Our General Services Department, we had Stan Smith, and then we were partnered with Steve Robeson from Communication Services and the ERC, or the Educational Research Coalition of the Carolinas. Thank you very much for all your work.
I want to tell you something from personal experience. Having gone through a project like this in another larger organization, I will tell you that you can't count on it going well. This is a high cost, high risk, high tech, absolutely mission critical project. As Shivanda pointed out, on time, on budget. And unlike my personal experience in another organization, without significant glitches or loss of communications. We rely upon, these are the folks that go in when everybody else is fleeing the scene. The police and fire folks have to have these skills, and this was pointed out at 9/11, that your system has to work. We are now fully equipped and up to the Homeland Security standard, thanks to the folks that are here today. I think this is the highest service, the highest project management performance that we could expect from a city team. And I don't use those terms lightly. So I'm very much appreciative of what each and every one of you did, and the rest of the team that couldn't be here tonight. So please tell them how much we appreciate it. Thank you. All right, moving right along. Unlike the preceding project, I really hope that Dawa Hitch and her team come in here right away so we can keep moving right along. The last recognition we wanted to do is really the opposite end of the spectrum. It wasn't a multi-year planning project. It wasn't one that required careful long-term tactical planning, resource allocations. It was more like a full court press. So the recognitions that we have here this evening, if I could first of all get Maggie to help me move the table out here, because we wanted to get a photo op of this as well. We don't do this very often either, but tonight we have 3 high-level recognitions to be made before our communications team that help put together the city bond program, the bond referendum for you, got the community messages out, got the city mapper out so that people could see where the projects were going. The peers in their field said that this was as well as you could possibly put together a communication campaign for a public referendum. And for that, the city is receiving these 3 awards. So, Mayor, if I could ask you to join us down here. And Dawa, if you and Jamie and Dan, do we have other representatives of the team here? Come on up. And if you'll take an appropriate place behind here, I think we're going to get a photo of this. It's been since the 1990s before the city even attempted a bond referendum. And so these are the 3 awards, national recognition that we have here today. We'd like to get a photo opportunity. And if I could just really step out of line here for just a minute and say that staff were very successful at this because of the great leadership around the dais. Working very quickly, swiftly, clearly setting your priorities and putting us in a position with clear messaging to get this out. And your willingness to go out and spread the message in consensus is the reason why it passed with 70% as well. You know, we can only communicate when we have really good leadership, good management, messaging to go with it. And I don't want to put too much attention on Mayor Mannheimer, but the countless efforts that you made to go out in the community to answer all the questions and use these tools that were made available to you by your communication team was invaluable. So hats off to you. If we could give them all a hand, I really appreciate it. And Dan's up here and the video's on automatic pilot, so we'll get this out of the way and get him back to work.
Holly's down there.
Holly's running this.
I want to also commend the city staff for pulling together these bond packages and helping get us organized so that we could get out there and do what we needed to do to encourage support. It was a big effort by a lot of people here, so thank you very much for all you did. All right, switching gears. If we're done with employee recognitions, we've reached the end. All right. The next item on our agenda is Motorcycle Awareness Month, and I have on my agenda that Jody Martin is here, and if Jody Martin will meet me down in front. No, seriously, you cannot come all the way. Come on. Should we just stand by? There we go. Thank you for coming up. All right, here we have a proclamation in honor of Motorcycle Awareness Month. Whereas it is fitting and proper to recognize that in Asheville, motorcycle riding is a popular form of recreation and transportation for many of our residents and our visitors. And whereas the Concerned Bikers Association of North Carolina is the oldest motorcyclist rights organization in our state. And whereas through the statewide Motorcycle Awareness and Rider Training Program, the CBA works with communities across the state to expand safety and awareness for the motorcycle rider and for the motorist. And whereas the CBA educates citizens, elected officials, law enforcement agencies, and motorcyclists about the importance of motorcycle safety and awareness. And whereas CBA members are available to give presentations in high schools and community groups and organizations to educate everyone about sharing the road with motorcycles. Now therefore I, Esther Mannheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, do hereby proclaim May 2017 as Motorcycle Awareness Month in Asheville and urge all citizens to join in this important safety effort by sharing the roads with motorcycles. Congratulations. And if anyone would like to come, say
Thank you. We are the Buncombe chapter of the Concerned Bikers Association, and in addition to being a legislative organization, we are driven to make the road safer for our bikers. We do not like burying our brothers and sisters when they're in accidents, so we want everyone to be reminded to watch for motorcycles, teach your children to watch for motorcycles. Instead of punch bugs, we're actually more fun to watch for. So we thank you for this.
The next proclamation is Endangered Species Day, to be presented by Julie Mayfield, Councilmember Julie Mayfield, and Sue Massey is on my agenda. And if you've got anyone else in your group who's with you, please feel free to bring them forward as well.
Am I standing in the right place? I don't. That's fine. This, I'm good. Okay. All right. Why don't you guys come over here? All right. So I have the pleasure of doing this Endangered Species Act proclamation, but I just want to give it a little bit of an introduction. Most of you in this room live here, so you probably know this, but I'm astonished at how many people don't. So Western North Carolina is one of the most biodiverse places in the entire world, not just in the country, not just on the continent, in the entire world. We are, in fact, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We have, by way of example, more trees in the Great Smoky Mountains than they have, more species of trees in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park than they have in all of Europe. We have the most diverse population of salamander species, for another example, of anywhere in the world. So this is a really special place that we live. We also have a lot of threatened and endangered species. We have, here in Western North Carolina, at least 13 species on the endangered list and 7 on the threatened list. And I'm just going to read some of these, partly because I just think it's important for people to actually associate animals with these numbers, not just the numbers. Also because some of them have some really fun names. So we have a bunch of bats. We have the gray bat, the Indiana bat, the Virginia big-eared bat. We have the spruce fir moss spider, the Appalachian elk toe mussel, bunched arrowhead, which is a plant, the green pitcher plant, the Roan Mountain bluet, the white irisette. So those are some of the endangered species we have. They're on the threatened list. We have the spot fin chub, which is a fish, Heller's blazing star, small world pogonia, which is a flower, Blue Ridge goldenrod. So those are some of them. Here in Asheville, in our watershed that our forefathers had the great foresight to protect, we actually have 3 of those threatened and endangered species that live in our watershed. And that, thanks to the good work of this council and former council member Mark Hunt, that watershed is now protected with a pretty airtight conservation easement that will protect that area and those species hopefully forever so that they can continue to recover. One more little piece, this is not about endangered species, but we do also have in these mountains a lot of endemic species. So endemic species are species that live nowhere else on Earth. They're thriving here, so they're not on those lists, on the endangered list, but they live nowhere else on Earth. So again, we need to protect them. And we have, by some counts, close to 300 of those plant and animal species that are endemic to this region, that again, live nowhere else. So again, pretty special place. So with all of that, I will go ahead with this proclamation. Whereas the Endangered Species Act became our nation's premier species and ecosystems protection law in 1973 and serves successfully as a crucial safety net for many plants and animals, and whereas United States Senate unanimously passed a resolution in 2006 establishing National Endangered Species Day as an annual celebration of success in saving vanishing species and to focus attention on continuing this important work, and whereas the people of Asheville, North Carolina recognize that our bioregion is home to an extraordinary and globally significant biodiversity of animals and plants, including several endangered species, threatened species, species of concern, and candidate species. And whereas our predecessors valued and protected a rich legacy of biological and ecological diversity, thus enhancing our society, well-being, and economy. And whereas we recognize that we have a stewardship responsibility to future generations and to other species sharing this special place that we call home, the city of Asheville, and therefore our citizens are supportive of the protection of endangered species and their habitats. And whereas local community groups, conservation groups, and other organizations, schools, colleges, and universities, and concerned citizens of Asheville are working to protect endangered and threatened species and habitats using the best available science. Now therefore, I, Esther E. Mannheimer, Mayor of Asheville, in upholding the Endangered Species Act, have the distinct honor of proclaiming May 19th, 2017 as Endangered Species Day in Asheville, North Carolina, and encourage all of our citizens, businesses, and institutions to celebrate and protect the rich diversity of our bioregion by embracing active species stewardship in their daily lives and business practices. Thanks very much.
I'm honored to be here, and I'd just like to thank the mayor and the city council very much for recognizing the importance of endangered species. Everything on this planet has a purpose, and we need to do what we can to sustain it. And just a couple of very short quotes that are favorites of mine. One from John Muir. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Wildlife and its habitat cannot speak, so we must, and we will." Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Councilmember Gordon Smith will be presenting a proclamation on National Public Works Week. And I know Greg Schuler is here representing staff. And
There's a group of people who isn't used to being in front of the camera right here. Well, the fact is that whenever you get a clean drink of water, you're walking along a sidewalk, or you're driving on a street, or a storm comes and the water flows with the way it's supposed to, it's because of the hard work of the people that you see here. They're not chasing cameras, they're solving problems and getting the job done. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and recognize. Whereas public works infrastructure, facilities, and services are of vital importance to the health, safety, economy, and overall well-being of the people of the city of Asheville, and whereas such facilities and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals, engineers, and administrators representing all levels of government who are responsible for and must plan, design, construct, operate, and maintain transportation, water supply, sewage and refuse disposal systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential to serving our citizens. And whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff public works functions is materially influenced by the people's attitude and understanding of the importance of the work they perform. And whereas it is in the public interest for citizens, civic leaders, and children to learn and understand the importance of vital public works programs such as drinking water, sanitary and storm sewers, streets and highways, public buildings, and solid waste collection and disposal. And whereas the theme for this year's celebration is Public Works Connects Us, and 2017 marks the 57th annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association. Now therefore, Esther Mannheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, does hereby designate the week of May 21st to 27th of the year 2017 as National Public Works Week in the City of Asheville, and calls upon all citizens and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and to recognize the contributions which public works officials make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, a pleasure and humbled to be here before you. Greg Schuler, Public Works Director, and I am very proud to represent this team of diverse and hardworking employees who are up early and out late every day. They will be working tonight while we're all home asleep and do the work along with our sister departments to make the city run. And appreciate all the support that you continue to provide for us. That's what it takes, and I appreciate that. Now, without further ado, I'd like for these employees to say their name, the division that they represent, what they do, and how long they've been here, just to give a little heads up of the cross-section for us.
I'm Sarah Sheldon. I represent the GIS Division of Public Works, and I have been here for 3 years.
Hi, I'm Brian Williams. I've been with the city 14 years, and in sanitation division 4 years.
Hello, Keisha Life. I'm representing the administrative division. I've been with the city of Asheville for almost 20 years.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Ball. I represent the Stormwater Division, and I have been here for 5 years.
Hi, I'm Gary Reynolds. I represent the Streets Division downtown, and I've been here almost 4 years.
Thanks again, really appreciate it.
I'd note that one member of the Streets Division stopped his truck today to warn me that there was a bear in the neighborhood.
Thank you. No. Okay, that concludes the proclamations and other recognitions on our agenda for tonight. And the next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any questions regarding the consent agenda? Or a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there anyone wishing to speak on the motion to approve the consent agenda? No? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we move through. Sometimes the consent agenda can take a while. I thought it was pretty quick. All right, the first presentation and report tonight is the presentation of the fiscal year 2017-18 proposed budget. As required by state law, this is when the budget is presented, and at our next city council meeting is when we will conduct the public hearing on the budget under the public hearing section of our agenda. And Barbara Whitehorn is going to, our Chief Financial Officer, is going to present the budget.
Hi, Mayor, members of council. I'm Barbara Whitehorn, as you said. Let me open this up. Okay, so to get started, I'll just go through a little bit of what we've been through, especially for the audience behind me, because I know you all have been there for each of these steps along the way. The preliminary forecast, we've had 3 work sessions, and this is the presentation of the city manager's recommended budget. And where are we headed? I know we've seen this 1,000 times too. Next council meeting will be the public hearing. Right now, the budget is available on the website. And obviously, any questions you all have, please submit to staff and we will get back to you. So the direction that we've had from council was to, well, we have to determine revenue neutral, but to evaluate where revenue neutral was and then look at what we needed in the budget. So as we're all aware, the citywide valuation of property tax has increased tremendously, nearing 30% for the whole city as an average. Our revenue neutral estimate and the revenue neutral that is published in the budget document was 39.5 cents. My latest estimate for that is 39.39 cents. So it's a little lower than I had originally anticipated. And I want to point out that difference because obviously it is at council's discretion to decide if they want to go full revenue neutral or 39.5 cents. So direction was to go revenue neutral plus the cost of debt service and implementation of the GO bonds plus a half cent for transit. from our last meeting. So our total proposed tax rate was the revenue neutral plus debt service on GO bonds and transit funding with a proposed rate of 43.5 cents, 4 cents lower than our current rate. And then to give a little context, I did some tax rate comparison, and I apologize that this is so busy. There are on this list 4 cities that are in reval years, and that's Asheville, Winston-Salem, Wilmington, and Greensboro. Greensboro and Winston-Salem have not presented their managers' budgets yet, and were not comfortable giving us an estimate of where they were recommending the tax rate because they're public and their council wouldn't necessarily be in the loop. So we couldn't get anything from them. Wilmington has published their budget, and their revenue neutral came in at 45.42 cents. And their recommended budget is 48.34 cents. So they went a little above revenue neutral.
I would just thank you for doing that extra work for this council presentation. I think it's safe to say that even with adjustments in Greensboro and Winston-Salem, that your rate, council, will be lower than all of those cities.
Most other cities in the state are seeing reval of around 5%. Our 30% is a tremendous outlier. So most of these, their revenue neutral is nowhere near where our rate was before revenue neutral. So the base budget. So what is included in the general fund operating budget, which is when we talk about the base budget, usually what we mean is the general fund. We have compensation, we have staffing, we've insourced labor, and we have transit improvements. And these are all things we've been over in the work sessions, but I just want to kind of remind you all without going into detail. And then efficiencies and cuts that we've made to make all of these things work were a lot of budget cuts in the general fund departments. Departments went through their budgets and really cut more, and we managed savings, especially with shared resources, and trying to really economize as much as possible. And the operating costs in the general fund is separate from salaries, wages, benefits, are actually reduced from the 16-17 budget by $138,000. So the budget I'm presenting tonight is actually slightly less on the operations side than last year. You all have seen this, the fund balance analysis, and how much we had available. And then this is an updated fund balance investments. We estimated the better than budget performance. And then these were the items that were identified. The ones that are highlighted, we had anticipated the replacement fire truck to cost $520,000. It's going to cost $510,000. And then the $42,000 for strategic partnerships and the neighborhood opportunity fund were added per your direction at the last council meeting. So that's where we stand on fund balance. And I'm fairly certain we'll be able to absorb that $338 at the bottom. So the base budget is balanced between expenditures and revenue, and the total general fund budget is $121,184,489. So moving on to the capital budget, and I probably need to actually catch up on my pages. We've gone over a bit of what to expect in the existing CIP and then in the GO bonds, and just to kind of talk about that a little bit, the existing capital improvement program was started in 2013-14, and it's approximately $110 million in projects, $110 million that we'll issue debt for. More than that if we figure in grants that we've received. It is 3 cents that council dedicated of general fund property tax to actually spend on the CIP. 1 cent for capital maintenance and 2 cents for economic development related capital investment. The capital maintenance money, actually that photograph there, the 1 cent, that is one of our capital maintenance projects where Victoria Road was redone right by AB Tech. So I know anyone who drove on that before is cheering. I know my son is. So the existing 5-year CIP, we talked about this also in the last work session, but just to refresh your memory, the changes and updates to that, you will generally see all of the same projects with the same timelines. We will have some changes to the Tiger 6 suite of projects, which is the large projects down in the River Arts District. And then we did a review of the pools and the needs for rebuilding all of the pools that we have. The Walton Street pool was rated the one most in need of replacement. So we had $2 million allocated. You had allocated that last year in the capital improvement program for pools. We need more than 5 to do all 3. So staff's recommendation in the budget was to rebuild Walton Street pool and then to wait on Malvern Hills and Rec Center. And then the I-26 connector, that's in the budget for the $2 million that council had directed. So what to expect for the GEO bond program. This will be the first year of really getting into the GEO bond program, passed in November, $74 million. This first year, what you will mostly see are streets and sidewalks, and you should see quite a bit of that. And then you'll see planning and design for parks and planning for affordable housing. And then, now that we've talked about the GEO program, I want to go into a little bit of where the additional 4 cents will go from the 39.5 to 43.5. Because it's 3.5 pennies that go to GEO bond implementation and debt service, and then a half a penny per the last work session for transit. So I wanted to show how that works in governmental accounting, especially for citizens, residents who don't necessarily know how that works. So I think we all know the business accounting structure. You have sort of your business conglomerate, and then you might have little areas that they do, like Kraft owns Philip Morris or something like that. And then they have divisions under them. It's basically a pyramid structure of business. Government, on the other hand, is actually broken into funds, each of which is kind of treated as its own business. So the general fund is the one with most of the main core services, and then you have water resources, parking, transit, debt service. There are more funds than that, but this is an example. So when we count for the 4 cents, you can see that the 1/2 penny will go to the transit fund, and 3.5 pennies goes to the GEO bonds debt service in the debt service fund. So that's how that works. The total operating budget for the city is 175, almost 176 million. And that's how it's divided up into the various funds there. Obviously, the general fund is the largest at 121 million. And then water resources is about 38 million. That's the next largest one. So we do have, at this point, uncontrollable budget variables that could happen. And this is really just a, what's out there, what can we worry about, I guess, really? Like, what do I want to keep you up at night? We could have an economic downturn. Let's all be sure to dream about that. There's uncertainty in the global market. We've seen consumer spending and consumer confidence go down in the first quarter 2017. Gross domestic product increase is only 0.7%. The final quarter of 2016, it was 2.1%. So we're seeing pretty anemic growth at this point. That's not to say that we're going anywhere bad, but it's certainly a little bit uncertain as far as our economy nationwide and globally. The legislative climate, there is a sales tax bill for redistribution of sales tax again this year. And this particular bill would reduce the sales tax distribution to Asheville by 1.1 million. So very nearly a full penny of value on our tax rate.
Barbara, what's the effective date of that bill?
July 1st, 2017.
Oh, okay. And with the fiscal note that you're citing there, the 1.1 million, do you feel like the assumptions in the sales tax growth are on for Asheville or too low?
These are the assumptions by the state, and I would say they are probably low.
Yeah, for us.
I don't
so that
know,
number, that loss number could be bigger.
Yeah, that loss number could definitely be higher than that. But 1.1 is what the state has said Asheville is likely to lose if this passes. So bottom line, should any of these unpleasant things come to pass, we would probably need to evaluate, staff would recommend that you evaluate lowering the investments with fund balance and considering either a tax increase or service cuts to balance the budget. So that's my unhappy slide. That's my only unhappy slide. So calendar recap, we're on May 9th, the proposed budget presented to council, and May 23rd, 2 weeks from today, will be the budget public hearing. And the budget public hearing, just for people who haven't been through one or, it's been a year, this is approximately how the hearing day will go. Staff will introduce, we'll give responses to council questions that are submitted between now and then there'll be public hearing comment from the public, council discussion, and then any direction you have for us before the June 13th budget adoption. So, the end.
Does anyone have any questions for Barbara? Again, this is a presentation only tonight, and the public hearing will be at our next meeting. Gordon, yeah.
So what does 1 penny on the property tax equal under this budget?
It's actually about 1.3 million, and the sales tax hit would be 1.1, so or a little more, so they're about in the same range.
And could you go back to the reserve slide?
Absolutely. I didn't realize I went through this many slides that quickly.
Yeah, it was way back there. One more?
This one?
This one, yeah. I just wanted to look at this. This one flew past really fast. Just noting that fund balance above the policy minimum, and I think that the conversations we've had around this table are wanting to make sure that we maintain bond rating and that we keep that moving in the direction that will allow for that, has been the discussion in the past.
I'm going to translate. Our savings account is in good shape.
Savings account is in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was also hearing from you as far as the uncertainties, and this was stuff that was talked about during our budget work sessions, was the huge degree of uncertainty at the federal level in regard, particularly in my mind, to housing and urban development, health and human services, some of these pieces that for this year, it looks like they might survive with their heads intact, but next year, I don't think decapitation is out of the question. As far as the sales tax math goes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that for every dollar in sales tax that's generated within the city of Asheville, the city realizes only 3 cents of that. Is that correct?
That's currently correct.
So where's the other 97 cents go?
Most of it goes to the state, and then there's an amount of it, about 21 cents, is divided up between all of the counties, all 100 counties. And then there's a portion that goes to Buncombe County and then to AB Tech.
And fire districts.
And fire districts,
School districts.
Yes.
And so
Thank you, that's really
the state legislation is redistributing that sales tax more largely to rural communities and less to urban communities. Is that correct?
Yes, it's actually setting up tiers of development tiers, they're calling them. And tier 1 are counties that are very rural and don't have a lot of development happening. Tier 3, which is where Buncombe County and Asheville rest, is where there's a lot of development. And so what they're doing is they're saying, we're going to apply these factors to the portion that we already give you, and for tier 3 counties, it reduces the amount of tax that we receive.
Thanks.
And if you look at that sales tax bills, the sales tax redistribution bill, which we dealt with last year as well, the impacts are oddly varied. So Wake County and Mecklenburg County come out pretty well. We have a very big hit, and Henderson County and Transylvania County also see a hit. So it's because of the way Asheville gets lumped in with the tier 1, right?
Tier 3.
Or tier 3, rather. I'm sorry,
Right.
I'm gonna never get it right if it's higher or lower. But.
It seems like it should go the other way. But.
Right.
If I may add to that point that I think you were trying to make, Councilman Smith, is that we have deliberately and intentionally positioned ourselves to absorb budget crunches or those kind of actions with the rainy day funds that we have. And because of that, our reserves are in good shape. They're not in excessive shape. They're right where the financial management criteria this council has set them. Our financial management practices, which Barbara covered very briefly, of making sure that we constantly find economies of scale, and we have quarterly reporting to this council and close watch on all operations of the city. Those financial management practices, as well as sound reserves and the robust economy that we have positioned us to get the highest possible financial rating from independent agencies, which is a AAA rating. So we're in good shape. We plan for, and as we present here, we try to be aware of what the risks are and move forward on sound financial basis.
I would like to add, and I appreciate all of staff's really hard work on this budget. I think this has been one of the more challenging budgeting cycles, oddly, since we also, some of us have been through the whole recession budgeting cycle. But when you don't have anything, there's not a lot to argue about. But in this situation, you know, we're looking at an expanded budget, and people that own property in Asheville are grappling with their new tax valuation figures that they're looking at, and they're wondering what the impact's going to be on their tax bill. And we talked about this as we've moved through this budgeting process, and we landed in a place where, of course, we built in the bonds because the voters approved the bonds. So we went to revenue neutral, and we approved an additional amount to cover the bonds. I continue to have some concern about the additional half cent. But I know that we as a council are committed to growing our transit program to reflect the enhancements we talked about last time, which roughly come out to around 600-ish thousand. So I personally would ask the city manager to look at a budget that does not raise taxes beyond the bond requirement, but that does incorporate that transit funding as well. And we've, the other items that we've talked about that you move through that we would be looking at in terms of expansion of services, which would include public safety as well. And I don't know exactly how that could be done. I don't know if a delay in the rollout would help this year in terms of not being in a position to not have to raise taxes beyond the bond. But I would hope that we could find a way to craft a budget that puts a hold on that tax increase to only incorporate the monies needed for the bond funding.
I asked by email, but I didn't expect an answer yet. That's okay. But if delaying the rollout of the downtown district of the police department would account for that half cent, I don't think the numbers quite match up, because that's about a 1 million altogether. And the other thing that we might consider is a reduction in the city contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, somewhat, because we do have the bond issue for affordable housing, which is a big chunk of change. I mean, that might be one place we could squeeze it a little bit that occurred. And it's not that I'm against affordable housing, but we have approved a huge bond for affordable housing. Because I agree with you. I would love to keep it to the revenue neutral plus 3.5. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some reactions to that. I also just have a process question. Like, are we having a big discussion about things today, or is that really?
Hopefully not big.
Okay. Okay.
Since we've had a number of work sessions, but if we want staff to make any changes from here to the public hearing.
All right. Then I do want to. I do want to say a couple things then. So I think I'm well on record as definitely wanting the transit increases, and I'm still willing to do a tax increase if that's what it takes. The cities that do transit well have to pay for it themselves, and that continues to be true and will only get more true, and we're just going to have to figure it out. As to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I think this may not have necessarily come back to council yet, but one of the things that we have discovered in terms of implementing the Energy Innovation Task Force recommendations around the low-income weatherization program is that we can't use bond money for that. So if we're going to use if there is an existing pot of money that we're going to use, it's our general fund allocation to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
And Julie, you know what, so what I would encourage is not to get too much into the weeds on the how do you do this, because I think we can provide some broad direction to Gary and have him make a suggestion for how to get there. And Barbara.
The one big question I do have, though, and this is for, it's probably actually a question for Kathy or Ken, and I'm not sure if either one of them is here. The thing that struck me about this, reading this, was the cost. This is the first time we have seen a dollar figure associated with the cost of the new structure of the transit management company. So the new structure.
And for those who can't see, you're gesturing to the budget, which you're pounding on in front of you.
That's what I'm doing down here. This is the budget in front of me. And so, just to remind people, we are switching, the proposal has been to switch the way that we structure our contract with the transit management company. The estimate is that change alone will cost us an additional $800,000. $850,000. Again, this is the first time that we've seen that number. I think
we had some rough.
We knew it was going to be more.
We knew it was going to be significant.
I will just speak for myself. I did not know it was going to be that significant. I know we are down the road on this. There is an RFP out, I believe. That is a lot of money to me, and you want
to look at the cost analysis around
I would love to look at the cost analysis, and also just if we have $850,000 to spend on transit, do we want to spend it on a different structure of a management system as opposed to expanding service? Now, there are benefits I know that supposedly come with that management structure. I would like to have a conversation about that. So maybe that's just me and Kathy and Ken offline, or I'm probably the only one who's really in the weeds.
I hear
I'm with you on that one.
Spend all that money.
Do we need to spend all that money? Is that where we want to put it?
Okay. We'll have an update for you for consideration on the 23rd, and we'll take a close look at that. I'll just add, we had proposals received yesterday, and they came in big boxes, and we're sorting through the information. We'll be more comfortable with that number. We were comfortable in lowering it from $1 million, which we suggested it would be earlier. What we had as a placeholder, and $850 is a reduction from that, and I'd like to get it down lower, but we'll look at that between now and the 23rd. But as the mayor indicated, if you've got specific areas that you want us to look at to find $650,000, I'd appreciate the general direction. And what we'll do is we'll come back on the 23rd with an alternative scenario that you can consider and work off of.
I just want to echo the mayor's earlier statement. On a broad strokes type of view, if we could look at something that would not raise the taxes and possibly put off the public safety allocation for another time and reevaluate, see how that works.
Well, and to be clear, I'm not saying that we wouldn't make a commitment to the public safety growth, but that it may be delayed in the ramp up to be able to find additional funds for this next year. That's where I was coming from. But regardless, I would like to not see an increase in taxes beyond the bond commitment.
I have one more thing. Sorry.
Well, go ahead and finish up.
Okay. All right. So again, one more thing on transit, and this, I don't know functionally how this would happen, but I just want to throw out the idea. This came up in a conversation yesterday. So if you look at the increases in our transit budget this year, it actually equates to about 3 cents on our millage rate. And what I'm wondering is...
Wait, you've got, hold on.
Only if you include the...
Only if we include...
Only if we include the 630.
Right, if we include the 630.
So you're probably 2.5 cents.
Well, I am
take that
including
out.
the 630.
Okay.
So what was shown in our budget document was an overall increase in transit funding that's about $3 million, right? Because it's the lost federal funding, it's the 630, it's the management contract, it's the full year of services that we implemented this year. It's a big chunk of change. And the analysis was that it equates to about 3 cents on the millage rate. I continue to believe that we need a dedicated source of funding for transit if we're going to get to the system that we need. And so my question that I would love to explore is if we took if instead of just saying, if we go this way, that we need to increase the millage rate by 0.5 cent, let's take the total amount of increase that we're proposing this year, which would equate to 3 cents, and actually dedicate that to transit. What I think...
Are we going to do that now? You want to get into that
No,
now?
what I want to ask for is the analysis. The reason to do
Okay,
that
I see what you're saying.
is that...
Which is what was reviewed.
The reason to do that is that if 3% is dedicated to transit for the foreseeable future, as the value of our property grows, the value of that 3 cent of that will grow as well, giving us a continuous increase in transit funding over time, which is what we need. So what I'm curious to know is if there are any projections about what an increase of that might be over time. If we dedicated 3 cents this year, what that might be.
So you want to see, all right, so you want to see some growth projections if we were to say we're going to forevermore dedicate, although you can't bind future councils, but we could forever dedicate 3.5 cents. 3 cents, and look
I'll
at
take
what
3.5.
and what that projected growth would look like.
Yes.
Because you're looking at what's the value of 3 cents.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wonder how that would have worked this year, but you get the concept that Julie's looking for.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I think it's a great idea, Julie. The idea of taking the current and proposed city subsidy to transit and having that kind of resolution around tying it to a certain number. In the way that we have our CIP when we did the tax increase last time, that is a certain number of cents of the property tax that allows us to continue to make investments in our infrastructure. In the same way, this would allow us to continue to make investments in our transit in a growing fund in a time when other funds are shrinking. So I'm really interested in knowing I don't even know if the number is 3. I think we need to I'd like to know exactly what the number is and then find a way to create a resolution around that number.
To clarify, when we're talking about 3 cents, are we talking about only the change from last year to this year, or the entire system, the 9 million?
I
the total city
calculated
subsidy.
the 3 cents, and it's the
almost 3.8.
It's the general fund subsidy.
Yeah, it's the
It's
general fund
not-
subsidy.
It's not the increase, it's the total number, general fund subsidy.
Thank you, sorry. And to give full credit, this was not my idea. This came up in a conversation yesterday with other council members. So.
Not a quorum.
I'm still going to give Julie credit.
Not a quorum. Not a quorum.
So as far as where I'm at on this today too, I really appreciate folks being sensitive to the fact that the county has bumped up their rate, and that's going to hit everybody that lives in the city. Everyone who lives in the city lives in the county. And as we and our city voters said, yes, please borrow this money for these bonds, and we are willing to have our taxes go up to pay for that. 70% of the populace said that. And to Councilman Bothwell's idea around taking something out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I don't think that the folks who supported that, and Councilman Bothwell did not support that piece of the bond referendum, he did not support that. I don't think that the folks who came in and voted for that were saying, hey, would you please raid the rest of the trust fund and just use this? I think that this was a general awareness that the affordable housing crisis is real and we need to go over and above to make this happen. So I won't be in favor of raiding the trust fund to make up in other places. So I'd like to keep it at revenue neutral plus 3.5, and I know that we are about out of turnips to squeeze more money out of. Gary's given me the look. And I understand that we may end up having to, that we will have to make some really hard decisions here, but I am supportive of continuing to grow our transit system as is necessary for a 21st century city of our size. And also ensuring that the community development needs of our community are being recognized and met. And so whatever we can do around strategic partnership funds in the coming year is something that I'm going to be supportive of, over and above what we're doing currently. That, and I remain supportive of seeing seeing our Asheville Police Department supported, and making sure that because what they're doing is projecting out a couple of years. So if we were to start this funding, it takes a couple of years to actually make all of these changes happen. I want the whole community to recognize that conversation around how we ought to be policing is front and center for all of us up here. But also front and center for us is the recognition that it's time for some further restructuring at a logistical level that I want to recognize and support as well.
Well, I think I've already stated where I think we could save some money is by not funding the police staffing that's been requested. But I would also like to say that I do want to see transit fully funded, and I too would like to see the strategic partnership fund increased. And I would like us to remain revenue neutral plus the 3.5.
And Esther, I just have a clarifying question. Just, I know there, what's up? I know there was a recommendation from I think it was Public Works staff, I'm not sure, and Stacy seconded that recommendation that there be a new position in Public Works specifically around waste and waste management, recycling and composting and things like that. I didn't see that position in here, and I just want to make sure that I'm right, that I didn't see it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you for the presentation. And again, at our next meeting, we will be taking public comment on the budget.
We'll go to work on this and present a scenario. Won't make everybody happy, but we will definitely give you an option for no tax increase. And to the last point about what's things that may have been left out, I will just tell you that what's on my desk that's not funded in this budget is 85 position requests and $11 million. So those are on the cutting room floor. We'll continue to try to find places to cut, and I think you'll find the response that we give you to be on target on May 23rd. So Barbara and I have anticipated that you might want to go to revenue neutral, and we've begun doing some homework and looking at some options, and it's helpful to get your direction here tonight, and we'll wrap this up with you next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the next presentation and report is from the Asheville Police Department, report regarding traffic stops and search data, and we've got Wade Wood here. Wade, will you remind us of your title?
Certainly. I'm Deputy Chief Wade Wood. And Mayor, Council, it's my honor to be here to represent Chief Hooper, who I'm sure many of you are aware is out of town participating on the Police Unity Tour, which is an event that raises money for the National Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I'm sure you are also aware that this event has been planned for several months on the Chief's behalf. So, excuse me, I appreciate the opportunity to address Council concerning the traffic stop data report. And I just want to emphasize the purpose of my presentation is to provide a brief review of Chief Hooper's report to City Council related to the findings and the 4 recommendations by Mr. Mance.
And for those watching, this report is attached to the agenda for tonight.
Correct, and it is also attached to the APD website as well. Before I get into it, I think it's also important to mention a couple things to set the atmosphere. It is also important to acknowledge that racial bias in law enforcement, as in any other profession, cannot be completely eliminated. We've got to acknowledge that fact. However, professional police management and practices aim for this goal. The first concern noted by Mr. Mance was APD's level of compliance with North Carolina General Statute 143B 903, specifically related to traffic stop reporting. It's important to note that the Asheville Police Department initiated monthly reviews prior to the November meetings with Mr. Mance and those other meetings with the Open Data Policing Group throughout the community through the several months following November. The monthly process began under Chief Hooper's leadership in conjunction with personnel reassignments in around July of 2016, and that was on a monthly basis. The second recommendation by Mr. Mance is to prohibit regulatory stops. Part of the research we've done is reach out to other law enforcement agencies, and there's been other city staff that has reached out as well. And through our efforts, we have not found any entity in North Carolina that does prohibit regulatory stops. However, it should also be noted, as noted in the Chief's report, that in February of 2017, APD officers were directed in instances of traffic stops related to regulatory or equipment violations to issue warnings rather than ticket for minor regulatory or equipment violations whenever feasible. And I think it's also important to emphasize that regulatory stops are not, nor have they been, a priority for APD. The third area is consent searches. I think very critical to understand in relating to our position on this and some of the trends in law enforcement. It's important to note the value of body-worn cameras related to police interactions, particularly related to obtaining consent to search. Body-worn cameras are a step forward in ensuring that the drivers are being treated in a fair and constitutional manner. In most cases, we acknowledge that written consent is preferred to verbal consent. However, the recording of an entire interaction via a body-worn camera is even more certain documented evidence as to whether or not the consent is obtained in a lawful and constitutional manner. In other words, that it was given freely and voluntarily. Body-worn cameras will enable documentation that a request for consent is based on reasonable suspicion and not being desperately applied. As noted in Chief Hooper's report, as well as the report by Mr. Mance, it's important to note that APD continues to see a downward trend in all of our searches. The fourth recommendation by Mr. Mance was to order periodic audits. APD agrees that audits of traffic stop data are an important component of oversight. Thus, as noted previously, we began monthly compliance audits in July of 2016. This is consistent with other agency enhancements of conducting audits and inspections of our staff, operations, and functions as part of our multi-year plan. In addition to the monthly audits, we will be implementing quarterly audits that will compare our data to that of the Open Policing Data website. And thirdly, it should be noted, should be emphasized that in speaking to other law enforcement agencies, the typical tends to be a quarterly report. We're going to continue to do monthly and implement the quarterly and do that comparison to the Open Data Policing. And just, it's not sufficient to just look at the numbers. We have to monitor for trends of disparate treatment and or impact. And we will be doing that. And the bulk of that falls under our professional standards division. Part of our continuous improvement, APD wants to work toward incorporating the 21st century policing principles so that we continue to be a model agency with providing professional service for all of our community. To that, we have implemented the body-worn camera program. We have incorporated community input into the use of force revision. We have trained staff in de-escalation implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and crisis intervention, just to name a few. And we will continue with our efforts to develop partnerships and build trust within the community. Steps going forward, we will continue to utilize body-worn camera to document searches and consent. We will continue with monthly compliance audits and implement quarterly audits comparing the data to opendatapolicing.com, excuse me. And we will continue to emphasize issuing warning citations for regulatory and minor equipment and violations versus a citation. And we plan to update and enhance the traffic stop report, which I think is a critical point. This will enable us to collect more precise data, such as a location of a stop, whereas now it just says the city of Asheville. So it will give us more precise locations that will enable better analysis of actually what is occurring and where the stop is occurring and possible reasons for the stop. And then finally, we will continue with our periodic retraining of officers specific to the traffic stop report and the reporting requirements. And this concludes my report and the presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions for review with Chief Hooper for an appropriate response.
Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Chief. So for the stops, I understand that the direction has been given to, if it's a regulatory stop, that the direction is just give warnings. Will those stops still be documented even though they would only result in a warning?
Yes, all traffic stops will be done.
Okay. And what research is there out there that that says a written consent, or is there research out there that says a written consent may or may not be more effective than verbal? One of the things I guess I was concerned about is if you went 100% to written consent, would an officer feel like they didn't need to explain it? They just hand someone a sheet of paper, and then if you had a person who possibly was illiterate or even intimidated by what I would suspect would be legalistic language, I was thinking potentially a written consent might have the opposite effect than intended. So you may not know the answer to that question, but.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you.
Okay.
There's multiple studies, obviously, so I'll have to get back to you.
Okay. And then the other question I had is, so all the audit results, both, I know that we review body cam footage for various officers. Is that public information, the results of the audits?
Those are internal at this point, I believe, but we can,
Yes.
I will get more.
I mean, understanding that you wouldn't want to mention a particular officer's name or whatever, but I guess I would ask that APD look into, or ask the manager to ask APD to look into publishing the results of those audits, at least at a high level for compliance.
The reporting audits.
The reporting audits, but also
audits of the reporting.
But there were other references to audits or reviews relative to looking at body cam footage and those kind of things.
Yeah, can I just add on to that the reporting thing? I know you all track a lot of data, and I know you can't commit to this, so I'll frame it in the same way that Gwen did, that I put this on the table for discussion. I think, everyone in this community has an interest in seeing Chief Hooper succeed and in seeing our entire police force succeed in addressing these issues. And one of the key ways that we know to do that is that we can all, as a community, better address a situation when we all are working from the same set of facts and the same set of data. So to the degree that you all are already tracking this, making that information around race associated with all kinds of stops, tickets, trespass, arrests, everything, making that data available on a more frequent basis in an aggregated format. I'm not seeking to single out people, but that's the only way that we're going to work from a common set of a common piece of information. We can know where we are, we can know where we have to go, and I think very importantly for this particular topic, I would love for this community to get around the table in trying to solve this problem instead of where it feels to me like we are right now, which is on opposite sides of the table. And I think regular, frequent reporting and public reporting of that data will help us see where we are and where we need to go. So that's what I'd love for you
And
all to
Julie, we
consider.
did hear in governance committee today from our tech folks that they're working on an open data piece around this.
Super.
In conjunction with APD and even the county about how to make some of this information about, police data and public safety data available and consistent between APD and Buncombe County and the other municipalities so that we can look at it more as a community too. So
that sounds great.
I think there's some work being done around it.
My question is about, one of the things I've heard asserted is that a written consent form is more likely to inform the driver that they can refuse to consent. When there's a verbal request to search, is it required that the officer say, you don't have to consent to this? Is it verbally stated, I'd like to search the car, you don't have to let me do that, do you consent?
I think that's officer dependent.
Yeah.
Ideally, you would like to have, you're offering, soliciting the consent to search. So
Right. I mean, because
again, that goes back to the legality that I spoke about. It has to be determining that it is freely and voluntarily given. So that's what we have to.
I can imagine that if an officer said, you wouldn't mind if I searched your car, would you? That the person responding could be feeling intimidated and go, well, no, I guess I wouldn't mind. And that would be consent, but it isn't, there's an intimidation factor for a lot of people looking up at an officer standing outside the car. And that's why I want to be really clear that whether, like you asked, Gwen, about whether the written thing is better or worse in terms of performance.
Is there another question?
So we got the report from Mr. Mance on April 25th, and for those folks who haven't read the APD response to that report, it is online under the agenda, so you can go to that. I'm going to dig in a little bit. It's often said that no other profession demands a higher ethical standard than that of law enforcement, and regardless of whether or not there are other careers that require similar dedication to doing the right thing, it is undeniable that there is an understandably tremendous degree of expectations that are placed on police officers in our community and throughout the country, and rightfully so. However, on my side of the track, and other people would suggest that there is a public perception that historically it seems as though police in and around the country are the only institutions that are above reproach. The public does not always see things the same way that the law enforcement community does, and as public servants, we've got to be cognizant of what the public's perception is. Trust me, I know about perception. I've been through that. But I just kind of want to go into this a little bit. There was a 7-page response that was given to council. Some things that kind of caught my eye were the uploading of the traffic stop data to the SBI database. We were told it's completely an automated process. There was a schedule that was given to us from 2015, from January to December, and 2 months stood out. That was February and August, where in February, APD said that they reported 691 stops to the SBI, and the SBI only listed in their database 9. And in August, APD said they reported 622 stops, but only 2 were reported by the SBI, that the SBI said. Now, there was some sort of disclaimer that said there's a small variance in numbers that may be unusual that the SBI has up there. And so, if you look through the 12-month period, you can see some of that variance. In May, there were 4 that didn't match up out of the sea. There's 765 in May, 761 were recorded as reported. In June, there were 635, 633 were being recorded. Basically, a variance of between 1 and 4. We have a variance in February and August of about 682 to 620, which totals to 1,300 plus reports. APD's response was it was unclear why this occurred, and there have been no subsequent similar anomalies. I'm glad that there were no subsequent anomalies. However, I am a little bit concerned that APD has not gone further at that point to find out why their information was not reported to the SBI. I would hope that in the future that we could look and make sure that when we're doing some sort of audits, that we're doing some sort of monthly check to SBI to make sure that these things are being recorded. We can't regulate what the state does on their side, but we can definitely ride their tail a little bit to make sure that things are syncing up. One of my concerns would be that, why? Was it an Asheville thing? Was our numbers the only one that weren't reported that month in February and August? Was it a statewide thing? Was it a glitch? I would like to know why. That's me. I'm okay with continuing to monitor how we do things through our professional standards section. I would just suggest that the information that's uploaded to the SBI be checked monthly to make sure that happens and find out why, as opposed to just saying, we're unclear why I didn't get there, or whatever. What else do we have? On regulatory stops, Mr. Mann stated that the regulatory equipment-based stops were disproportionately impacted black motorists in Asheville, and reported that an analysis of stops beginning in 2011 revealed that 40% of black motorists were stopped for these violations compared to 32% of white motorists. APD does not dispute these calculations. However, in that same instance, there seems to be a shift in premise that a substantial proportion of these violations are the result of the inability of people in lower income circumstances to afford to keep their vehicles in compliance. As such, these necessarily have a disparate impact on African Americans. What I would say is you cannot say that the reason why drivers, regardless of race, choose to operate vehicles that are not properly registered or defective equipment issues or whatever the regulatory concern is, and say that's debatable, and then in the same sentence say, or try to affirm that a large portion of these violations are solely the result of the inability of poor people in lower income circumstances. All that says is it sucks to be poor in Asheville, and then on top of that it says it sucks to be poor in Asheville and be black. My concern is, if this is the case, let's say I accept that premise, if this is the case, where are the poor white drivers that drive in Asheville? Because African Americans only make up a small percentage of individuals in this city, and to consider that the premise, to accept the premise that there are only poor black drivers being pulled over, or that this type of thing only affects poor people, where are the poor white individuals in this community? Are they not riding around with bad tags? Are there not individuals that have regulatory issues? That's another concern. Again, like I said, blacks only make up a small percentage of that. And even if we prescribe to that premise, you have to wonder, where's everybody else? Give me just a moment. There is some good work that was done here in this response, especially in a short period of time. I want to go to the consent issue. The issuance of body-worn cameras is a substantial step forward.
Yes. Hey, Keith, on that last point you just made, just to clarify for the public, I think what this is saying, it's not saying for every 100 motorists stopped, 40% were black and 32% were white. It's saying of people who are stopped for equipment violations, right? That's how
The sentence reads, Mr. Mann stated regulatory and equipment-based traffic stops disproportionately impact black motorists in Asheville, right, and reported that an analysis of stops beginning in 2011 revealed that 40% of black motorists were stopped for these violations compared to 30% of white motorists. The next sentence says, APD does not dispute these calculations.
Can you help us understand what that sentence
That is
means? 'Cause
correct. I believe that's referring to regulatory and vehicle equipment violations. Where
But
that
what does it
person
mean?
stops.
I don't, it's not saying,
Is it saying that of all of the black drivers who were stopped, 40% were for regulatory and of all
And
the
all
white
the white
drivers
drivers
stopped,
stopped, 32
32%
was
were
for
for regulatory? Is that what that means, or is it?
I think what that is saying, and there again, I would probably defer to Mance for his interpretation, Mr. Mance for his interpretation, but I would assume that of all the total vehicle stops, those that were regulatory or equipment violations resulted in 40% being white and
40% being
40%
white.
being black, 32% being white.
no, because then what's the other population? I don't understand, so there's a whole lot of head nodding out there, and maybe we can get an explanation.
All I'm saying is, on this matter, I'm only going by what was given
You're
to us in
saying-
both
I
reports.
think you're-
But APD didn't dispute it.
But I think it's not
Yeah,
clear what
but it can
means
be,
exactly.
it could mean that 10 black motorists were stopped and 100 white motorists were stopped, but of the 10 black motorists that were stopped, 40% were stopped for equipment violations. Of the 100 white motorists stopped, 32% were stopped for equipment violations. It's not giving you a total number.
It says regulatory stops.
I'm not debating that. I'm saying this isn't supposed to add up to 100%, because otherwise, what is the other population that makes up 28% of Asheville?
I think to make it in its simplest form and to conclude in just a second is that the numbers don't match up, and APD didn't dispute that. As far as the 40% of black individuals and 32% of white individuals. I'm just reading from what they had. If they wanted to dispute it, they could
No,
have said that.
but that's not what it says.
Well, then that's an APD thing. That's
No,
not
no,
a
I
me
mean,
thing.
well, okay. Anyway, we can get clarity on this.
I do
but
wanna go to-
we don't have the raw numbers here, so. we
I do
can't-
want to go to the last point, which is the consent. APD says in most cases, written consent is preferred over verbal consent. And I would agree, and I would like to sever any doubt in that matter and ask that we make consent mandatory. I have an individual of my family who was pressured into giving a consent search, asked by APD officers more than 4 times to consent to a search verbally, was under the auspice of, if he did not consent, he would be detained for an unspecified time until he did. He was out in the cold, just hanging out, and the officer was asking. That's been documented. There was a complaint filed on that. But that is what I'm basically saying is, let's sever any doubt on whether or not we are doing the right thing with consent searches. I think there's information in here that deserves to be, the suggestions of Mr. Mance deserve to be recommended on some instances. The written consent would be one. I like what APD is doing with the audits and continue to do that, but also look at, try to find out what's going on with the SBI stuff in those 2 months and make sure that doesn't happen. As far as the mandate of regulatory stops, trying to make that less of a priority, it seems like we're already doing that as far as the warning tickets and things. Gwen made a good point asking if those were being documented. That's pretty much just where I'm at with all of this.
Wade, do you think it would be possible for the council just to receive a written quarterly or semi-annual update on the audits we're doing? Just send it to the manager so we could see it. Not a formal presentation at council, but just a follow-up to this so we can see in the coming months how that's going.
I would defer to the chief.
The chief,
There again,
yes.
I can't speak on her behalf for
All right,
that,
I'm just making the
but-
request. I think it would be helpful for council to see those updates in the future, just to see how the audit is going.
And did you request quarterly or?
Whatever.
Just updates.
Whatever the council prefers. I assume quarterly would be preferential.
Can I just follow up one thing with Keith's point on the consent searches? I mean, this memo clearly seems to indicate that as cities are transitioning to body-worn cameras, the written consent seems to be falling away if it was ever there. And it makes sense to me intellectually that the body-worn camera would create the atmosphere and provide the best evidence of consent and lack of bullying and things like that, and provide the best check on an officer's behavior. But body-worn cameras are new still for us, and so I do wonder whether there is an interim step that we can take to, until, well, two things. Number one, that there be a very consistent review of body-worn camera footage around consent, around these particular kinds of stops, these consent searches, the consent searches, so that we can see, or not we, but you all can see the dynamic that is developing. And if the body-worn cameras aren't doing what I think this memo and the chief would indicate that they're supposed to do, then we would look at something else, and adding another layer on that. I'm kind of willing to. I mean, I could go either way. I would be perfectly happy if there were a written consent process implemented. I would also be perfectly happy with a commitment of reviewing the body-worn camera footage and then deciding whether there's a problem that needs to be addressed that the body-worn cameras aren't addressing.
And I would reiterate, as I spoke about, the body-worn camera does give a picture of the full interaction of demeanor of all parties involved, to include the officer. And Greensboro, as an agency that I spoke to that had a previous mandatory search that has now and backed off of that, and they have a robust body-worn camera program and enabled consent to be documented on a body-worn camera.
And just to remind all of us the status of body-worn camera footage review privileges, that's the chief and the person involved?
The parties involved.
And that's it, unless there's a court order, is that correct?
Or their attorney.
That's a state, and that's a state.
Right, that's a state law thing, so that's not our thing. We wanted to be better than that, but.
So to piggyback off of that, and I'll close out with that is, body-worn cameras, that's a good thing. But in the moment, and to me, body-worn cameras only serve a good cause in this instance after the fact, after someone has been possibly wronged, after somebody has said, well, the way the consent was given was yada, yada, yada. Written consent clears that up in the moment. As well as, when you got body-worn cameras, we can't even see the footage. I can't see the footage, it's just one of those things that written consent would clear things up and sever all doubt in the moment. You don't want, and if you got probable cause, you don't need consent. But if you don't have probable cause, you need consent. So you need to clear that up in the moment, not after the fact, after somebody may have possibly been wronged or alleged that they have been wronged. And then you have to go look at body-worn cameras. You can say, you signed it right here, black and white. And we explained it to you. But that's where I'm at.
Did you have a?
This isn't for Wade, but the legal department also sent around a memo to council, and I inquired with the city attorney whether she would be open to having that be released. And I just wanted to see if there was a will among council. I know that there was a need for revision to make sure that those legally confidential pieces were withdrawn from that prior to making it public, but just wanted to know if there was a will among council to just go ahead and add that layer.
This is on the consent search issue. I think that would.
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Maddox,
Right. And as far as, yes, the existence of it is fun to talk about. It does have some data about what other cities do, and I think we can make that generally available. Yeah, right.
Thank you.
So a memo regarding the consent search analysis.
Right,
Yeah.
It was an analysis of what different local governments in North Carolina, how they deal with consent searches and regulatory stops, so we can sort of compare what we do to others.
I would like to interject for people who are following at home who may be reading the attached document on our agenda. I think Mr. Mance will address this during public comment, but in the document, it asserts that Mr. Mance did not provide the list of citations to the police department, and in fact he did, but the police department missed the email. They discovered that later. So I'd just like to make sure people who are reading that document know that there is a correction made there.
I'm still not aware of that. So.
Okay. On the consent searches, as a trial attorney, this is sort of fascinating to me. I don't do criminal work, but, from a policing perspective and from a prosecuting attorney's perspective, they want to have a good search because otherwise their case falls down if they don't have a good search. So I'm open to suggestion. I think the written consent search has a lot of benefit from a prosecuting standpoint because you've got that piece of paper. But if you don't have the video to back it up, there could be a little bit of a he said, she said around how that consent was obtained. So I would assume that the video would trump a written consent in terms of really determining whether or not there was consent provided for the search. But I know that we are working to make sure our consent search numbers are lower. We want to keep those on the lower end, and not having expertise in policing, I've got to defer to the police department. If they feel the camera consent is better than the written consent, I'm going to go with that recommendation. I do think it would be helpful for this council to kind of have a 6-month follow-up maybe to look at the number of consent searches versus the number of probable cause searches and how those consent searches were documented. And, I don't know what kind of data you collect around that, but, were there issues with it? Is it working? Or, are we getting complaints to the police department about, forced consent searches or however you want to refer to that. So some way for us to kind of be able to get our arms around how frequently that's happening, what the numbers are, and whether that system's working or not. So that would be helpful to me to understand a little bit about that.
I just want to be strongly on record saying that written consent searches benefit the individual that is being pulled over to know for a fact that the officer cannot search their car without their consent. And if you come to me and you pull me over and you say, Mr. Young, may I search your car? And you don't have probable cause, and you say, Mr. Young, would you sign this for me to search your vehicle? And I say, no, that's it. That lets me know, as opposed to someone being asked 4 or 5 times, hanging outside, other officers showing up. I'm just being anecdotal here. Can I search? 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 Then finally you go, they're not going to let me go if I don't want to do that. And you say, yeah. So anyway, that's me.
Well, and I have never seen the form, so I don't know if it informs the driver that they have the option to say no or not, but that would be an interesting thing to look at.
And to the point about, I think what we're trying to avoid here is bullying people into giving consent. And repeated requests to do that, as your nephew experienced, is another example. So I'm curious to know kind of what, and maybe we all just need to go through this experience, but what is the best practice and approach here? Is it to ask somebody repeatedly before you take no for an answer, or you get a yes, or is it, how do we ensure that we are in fact engaging in the best practice? And again, key for me is, now that we have the body-worn camera images, what is the review of that film like? How often does it happen? When does it happen? And how do we know that corrective action is happening? Because it shouldn't just be the end when someone bullies. It should be that somebody's reviewing that and then having a conversation with the officer and fixing that problem, if that's a problem.
Of course, review of video takes an awful lot of time. That's one of the problems, I think, with the body. That we examined that for a couple of years in public safety before we went ahead with the system, and I think it's Seattle. They had a public records request, and it was going to take the city 10 years to turn over or to analyze several months of video. So reviewing every traffic stop when it's on video takes, whereas if it's on paper,
I just think it's a simple thing. Either you got probable cause or you don't. Either you got probable cause to search without consent or you don't.
Well, there are on the traffic stop report, there are more than just consent and probable cause. There are search incident to arrest, protective frisk, and I'm trying to think what the other is, search warrant as well. So you have those multiple categories, and candidly, I think part of the issue we're talking about here relates back to the traffic stop report. That goes to the point that I made, that we want to look at addressing that to be able to collect more detailed information as other agencies have done, because the report itself doesn't give you a full picture of what is occurring either. If I may ask someone for consent even though I have probable cause, it doesn't mean that I don't have probable cause. So agencies that have implemented this have seen changes as well. So there are multiple factors involved. It's not as easy to paint it with one stroke to say this is the way to do it or not. There are multiple factors involved and multiple factors that need to be assessed in comparing to this. And was asked earlier about various studies. There are multiple studies out there, some that debunk this report, some that fully support it. That's why I think to take one approach and look at it isn't going to serve the community well. I think we need to look at it from multiple angles and to address it as best we can to enhance our police department, as well as to ensure that we're providing professional service to the community.
And Wade, our report, our memo from you says that for the years 2015, 2016, consent searches totaled 137 consent searches for the 2 years.
Yes, it is a very small number for the 2-year period.
So, whatever, 70 a year.
Yeah, and I believe that I have for total searches in 15-16 was approximately 407.
And so of those.
So, yeah, so the small percentage of that was consent, which I believe was roughly, of those, of 13,700 traffic stops, about 1% of those resulted in consent, which was about 139.
And
so it's a small number, not to discount, but it is a small number that we're talking about related, comparative to the 13 plus thousand.
And it seems to me that, I mean, written consent doesn't, yes, it is a piece of paper, but it doesn't mean that you weren't bullied into signing it. I mean,
Right.
we have decades of legacy of forced confessions and all sorts of other things that have gotten, that don't put people in the right place where they ought to be. So I continue to think that it's probably a combination of what happens in the stop and the hopefully better behavior that is generated by the body-worn cameras. And if written consent, I agree with you, that's a point in time, a decision point that could be helpful. To me, that would not, just a written consent doesn't automatically say, yep, that was a consensual search.
To move things along, may I summarize the notes I've taken thus far, a follow-up, and
where do we go?
I think there's points already been made that you want to see some additional information provided. Starting with, are there independent studies of written consent effectiveness and advice or recommended practices? 2, we should respond to the SBI data questions that were raised. 3, is it possible to compile aggregate data of performance audits and make available as open records and quarterly reports to council? And finally, my notes include what is the APD plan for creating other key disparity metrics? Does that summarize what I've heard from council?
I would just like to say that I also support the written consent portion.
Okay.
All right, Wade, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Our next item is a presentation, an update on the Food Policy Action Plan, and Kathy Ball is here to make this presentation.
Mayor and members of City Council, good afternoon. I really don't have a presentation. I come here today just to kind of update you on the status of the Food Action Plan that was adopted by City Council in January of 2013. And just to real quickly to go over the goals of that program. The goals of the program was to increase access to food for people who experience food insecurity, to continue to grow a robust regional food economy, to strive to meet the nutritional needs of the community with local food, prepare for short-term and long-term food emergencies, and collaborate with regional partners. We have most recently hit a successful milestone in rolling out several programs that we think will accomplish this. Under the Asheville Edibles program, we have a program called Adopt a Spot that Asheville Greenworks is sponsoring, collaborating with us, but really handling through them. That allows people to either do adopt a spot for the purpose of bee pollination and/or edibles. We are setting up community gardens on city property. We have those 3 locations identified on the website. We got some feedback today that we probably could map those out a little bit better so that people could see where they were specifically, so that they could go take a look at them. Under each of these, there's applications on how communities can set up these gardens and sponsor them and what's required to do that. And then thirdly, establish urban agricultural leases for 3 or more years. So it gives people an opportunity under more of an larger agricultural use than community, and we've identified 2 sites for those locations. I think that at this point, all of the things I touched on with those 3 programs have accomplished the goals. We will continue to work on the items, but we just want to bring that before you today and then hear any comments that you all would have.
Thank you, Kathy. Does anyone have any questions of Kathy before she walks away?
I have a question. On community gardens, when a community group gets together, do they establish rules? Is there a model for rules for a community garden, or do they set up their own rules for a community garden? I mean, I can imagine a conflict, say, between chemical agriculture and organic.
So we are hopefully working on the first community garden that would be located on Page Avenue, and we are establishing some best practices in sustainability as it relates to that by trying to use rain barrels as a water supply. I think there are guidelines to follow, but then the community would need to come together and decide specifically on how to do that. But it is intended, all 3 of these sites, or 4 with the Page Avenue site, are intended to be sustainable, not have pesticides. They're organic in nature, but the community that agrees to do it would decide what to do, and then they would go into an actual agreement with the city on how it would be maintained.
Thank you.
And I'm stepping in for Amber Weaver, who did all the work on this, along with the partners, so I'm a poor substitute and may not be able to answer all the questions.
I just wanted to thank all the members of council, because this was a unanimous priority for everyone at the dais here, and the recognition that this has been an amazing community-led process to build out the food action plan, that everyone who has participated in the Asheville Buncombe Food Policy Council is responsible for seeing these programs happen. This is a community-led effort, and if it's going to be successful, it's going to be a people-powered effort. City government's not going to go out there and plant the gardens. We're not going to grow the food.
We're especially not going to
But we have been told by our community that there was more opportunity desired to be able to use publicly held land for this public purpose. And so it's very exciting, and I'm really grateful to Amber and the members of SACE who worked on this. There's been a lot of hands that have helped to bring this forward. So grateful. Everyone, please spread the word. Glad to hear that the mapping is going to get a little clearer. And that's exactly the kind of feedback that we need if we're going to make this program successful.
And I'd like to thank Councilman Smith for pushing it on social media. That was a really good idea to spread it around.
Okay, so we're going to move into public hearings. So our first public hearing is regarding this proposed city's consolidated action plan for 2017-18, which sets out the proposed use of federal community development block grant and home investment partnership act funds for the coming year. And we've got Heather Dillashaw.
Good evening, everybody. I have a couple of quick things to say to update the staff report a little bit. When we wrote this staff report, we did not know what Congress was going to do with the budget. And I am happy to have good news for you about the congressional budget and what that means for our HUD dollars. They have passed a budget, and in that budget, all of our HUD funding remains intact for 17-18. So that means that our estimates for fund, it's huge, this is a very big deal. That the CDBG and home funding that we are estimating here is intact. Additionally, just for your information, that I know the HCD committee knows this, is it also means that $1.3 million in direct assistance to those transitioning out of homelessness also remains intact and will be coming into our community for 17-18. So good news around budget that's different from what is in the staff report. So that means that these recommendations should be able to move forward, assuming you approve them with the funding that is listed. Some clarifications too from some of the questions that we've had about the actions of the HCD committee in March, and this is related to the congressional budget. In March, when the Housing and Community Development Committee was making their allocation recommendations, we did not know what the climate was going to be for the budget. And so in that reality, what they did was allocate the money that we knew, but also know that we didn't know if we might need wiggle room. So what you see in their recommendations is an allocation to the Housing Authority for Lee Walker Heights. Their recommendation at the end of that meeting was to have that as a placeholder if we needed that money in case congressional funding went down. But if that reality did not happen, and the reality that we're in now, where we have all the funding that we expected, that money that is allocated to the Housing Authority currently be allocated to reserve and taking out of the Housing Authority for Lee Walker Heights, along with amending the 16-17 allocation to Lee Walker Heights for a further round of funding in the late summer. Is this ringing a bell, HCD committee? A further round of funding in late summer with those dollars, assuming we are going to have them. We are expecting to have those dollars now.
What is that total, Heather?
It's a little over $300,000, about $315,000. Assuming if you amend the 16-17 action plan and moved tonight to move the 17-18 allocation to Lee Walker Heights to reserve.
So just to demystify that sum, the Housing Authority has been working on the Lee Walker Heights effort for some time, and once the bond passed, their question was, might they qualify for some of that bond funding rather than having it come out of the Community Development Block Grant? And so when we were having our Housing and Community Development Committee meeting, what happens every year is that there's more people applying for more funds than we have. What happened this year was the Housing Authority said, if we will volunteer to come out of CDBG, if we can have that funding guaranteed from another source within the city. And what that did was allow us to fully fund every single applicant that came forward, and if council moves to have that Housing Authority money come out of the bond fund, it will allow us to have an additional $315,000 towards community efforts this year. So kudos to all the folks at the Housing Authority for kind of moving that forward, and you should have seen the jaws drop in that room when everybody got fully funded. People have been doing this their whole careers, have never seen it. So it was a really special moment that day. So hopefully that clarifies where that piece is tonight, and it will require council deciding whether to leave that money in CDBG or to move it out and allow for that reserve allocation to happen later in the year.
Won't we also need to have council look at the allocation out of the bond funds to Lee Walker? I mean, it's all.
If council agrees to have that piece come out of bond funds rather than out of CDBG, but that would be a council decision tonight.
Would that be possibly like the housing trust fund, the bond allocation to that?
The affordable housing piece of the bond.
But not a specific, just overall broad, we hadn't gotten to the weeds on that? Or?
That's right, we're still parceling all that out. But I think that would make sense, Keith.
And Heather, so what Gordon said is true. There was a moment of complete joy that we were able to fund everybody. And so are those the amounts that are reflected here?
That's correct. The
Okay.
amounts that are reflected there.
Because this also reflects the Lee Walker.
Correct.
Okay.
So the reason that you had a balance for Lee Walker is that you could not fully fund public service, so you cannot fully fund the public service activities because of the HUD cap on those funds, not from our want to fund those things or your decisions to fund those things, but because HUD puts a percentage cap and has a particular formula about how that percentage is done. And so the additional funds from the Section 108 payoff that gave us the additional dollars do not count toward that 15% cap, so it does not move it. So when we do have these additional, if you move tonight and we have this additional money to do another round of CDBG funding, there will be no public service activities eligible for that, for those dollars. And so you have funded all the applications other than those to their full amount, but you couldn't move the others.
And again, just to clarify, the public services cap is 15% of the CDBG amount.
And last year's program income and some other HUD random things, yes.
But some of the things that aren't under what's called public services are like Habitat for Humanity, Carolina Small Business Development Fund, Eagle Market Street Development, Green Opportunities. Here we go.
So this is
Those are
CDBG.
Those are the those include the public service
Yeah.
pieces.
They do.
So just to Heather, can you just kind of break it down which is public service and which isn't?
Sure. So public services are Helpmate, Homeward Bound's A-HOPE Coordinated Assessment Program, On Track, Pisgah Legal Services, and the YWCA. Those are all public service activities.
So what this will allow us to do, if council chooses tonight, is to have a roughly $315,000 allocation round for CDBG later in the year.
Correct. You will have to make a motion to amend the 16-17 action plan and to move the 179 amount from the Housing Authority to reserve.
Somebody say so moved.
So moved.
And I'll second that, but I would also add to that motion that, that in connection with that, council is going to look at allocating so that Lee Walker Heights money gets funded out of bond money. Otherwise,
why don't we do a separate motion on that?
motion?
Yeah, so I'm wondering tonight, I will just offer this up, if you would allow staff to go back and consider looking at that funding, either through bond funding, and leave that option open.
Okay.
Because there may be additional Section 108 money that is actually more appropriate for infrastructure money, which is what we're funding for the Lee Walker. So I don't know that you necessarily tonight have to speak to where that money will come from.
Okay.
I think you speak to the fact that you don't want it to come from CBDG.
You're right.
That's
Yeah, that you would speak to that, and then we would work through the recommendations on whether it would be bond or whether it could potentially be, because we have a lot of capacity in our Section 108 money that may be a funding opportunity.
I would just want to make sure, though, that, I feel like every several months, we circulate emails and say, where are we on Lee Walker? Do we still all have the money set aside for Lee Walker? So I would want to make sure that we had in the minutes that we are directing staff to find a replacement for the monies that we're offsetting here tonight, which is, I think, a good idea, and I support it. I just want to make sure that we don't drop the ball and forget that we made the commitment.
So that everybody's clear, the motion is to,
Well,
I got the motion, I just want to make sure that we're clear that on the second part, that we're not necessarily
going to use bond
Gonna
money,
use
or
bond
maybe
money
going
for
to use
this right
Section
now.
108.
That'll be a separate motion.
Right.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. You want to say more things before we
I do,
open up the
because you have to
public
look at the
hearing?
home allocation too before you complete your motion.
Do we need more than one motion?
No, but you need to look at the
There's
home
CDBG and
recommendations.
home.
CDBG and home recommendations is one action for our action plan to HUD. So you need to also look at the recommendations for the home funding, which are here, and make that a part of your motion as well. I'll note that the $675,000, the biggest allocation here to Mountain Housing Opportunities projects is for 95 affordable units in Swannanoa. So they are competing for a 9% tax credit program, and it would be a big win for the community to have those 95 units, leveraging the home funds for this.
Home funds are federal dollars, for everyone wondering, and they are as you can see here, allocated towards helping people get into and stay in affordable housing. There was another project that was initially funded down in Transylvania County that fell through, and that the lion's share of that was reallocated into the Mountain Housing Project in an effort to make their application for low-income housing tax credits more competitive.
And process-wise, so if these motions go forward and you adopt them, what we would do with the reallocation round and amending the 16-17 action plan is we would do this again. The HCD committee would decide how they want to accept applications. They would make recommendations again, and it would come back to the council for another public hearing this fall.
Oh, I can hardly wait.
Okay. Are you
So the
you're satisfied
motion,
with the motion?
since I said so moved, maybe let me just restate this. So I move that we approve.
Do you have to have a public hearing?
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
So
Well-
then I shouldn't make a motion yet.
Why don't we make one so somebody knows what we're
Oh, okay.
gonna vote on?
Okay, so I move that we approve the recommended funding levels as presented, and that we take the reserve money created from the Lee Walker Heights, that we created, put that into reserve, take the Lee Walker Heights money out, put it into reserve, and that will create an opportunity for another round of CDBG funding later this year.
Does that capture everything you want?
Yes.
Okay, so we had a motion and a second.
yeah.
Is there anyone wishing to provide comment on this item? This is the public hearing under A, both pieces under A. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we want a second motion on our broad commitment to finding a solution to the funding gap on Lee Walker through something else like the bond money for affordable housing or Section 108 or something else that the staff determines is appropriate.
So I would make that motion and recommit to our aggregate funding and
Second.
on
Lee Walker. Second. So we have a motion and a second.
We should probably say that the Housing Authority knows that this is happening and they're okay with it.
Anyone wishing to comment on that motion? Nope. Okay, we didn't have to have a public hearing on that one, but all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Thank you. Thank you all. The other item I have under public hearings is a public hearing to consider a conditional zoning from institutional district to institutional district / conditional zoning for the expansion and upgrade of a waste transfer station at the property located at 190 Hominy Creek Road, and Sasha is going to present this item.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Don't come here often enough, I guess. So, thank you very much, and members of the public. Yes, I'm here to talk about the conditional zoning for 190 Hominy Creek Road, which is currently the Buncombe County Transfer Station. The county is in need of updating and expanding this facility. Just as a reminder for everyone, Hominy Creek Road starts, Shelburne Road starts here. It's very close to 240 and Brevard Road. This peninsula is between Hominy Creek and the French Broad River. And that's just a look from the sky. At the southern tip of this peninsula is where the French Broad River Greenway starts. The Hominy Creek Greenway ends at Shelburne Road. It gets a little confusing because we have Hominy Creek mentioned a lot. But basically, we have two existing greenways on either end of these roads. Just a quick mention, the surrounding zoning, most of the zoning is Buncombe County zoning. Across the river is the Biltmore Estate. Across Hominy Creek is actually the WNC Farmers Market. And to the south is Conference Center zoning. This is pretty isolated piece of land between these two waterways. So the impact of the expansion and rehabilitation is really not going to affect our neighborhoods very much. So here we have a basic site plan. Here are two existing buildings that are already there. This building back here is the new proposed building, about 20,000 square feet. It is closer to the greenway, and it is proposed to be about approximately 7 feet higher than the existing building. So it's not hugely higher, but it is closer to the greenway. There are 2 driveways that access the site. Those are planned to remain exactly the same. This top driveway, which is very close to that I-40, under the I-40 kind of DOT right-of-way, that's where all the trash trucks and waste management trucks come in, and we were told it's between 350 and to 500 trucks a day are coming into that site. This lower driveway is a much lower volume. That's employees. It's where Buncombe County uses that facility to service their fleet vehicles. We're going to get into a discussion of sidewalk in just a minute, but just to clarify, this is the frontage of their lot, so that's the portion of their parcel that they are responsible for putting a sidewalk on as a part of this project. And this is the site of an old landfill. Many people don't know that, but so there is a limit on landscaping actually on top of the landfill. The county is coming very close into compliance. We've got street trees along the front and some parking landscaping in the back of the parking lot. In the conditions in my report, they were asking for modifications for parking lot landscaping, but they are going to plant the remaining, those shrubs around the edges of the parking lot. There actually are probably so many trees here north of the site that once we count those tree credits, I think they'll be in compliance for building impact. Because they can't plant trees on top of this landfill site, Buncombe County has offered to plant those 54 trees kind of on the side of the site, so it won't be on top of the landfill, but it'll be between the greenway and the new building, which will help screening further. It will be on their land, it won't be on our easement, so we won't be maintaining those trees. That'll be Buncombe County property. There's just a very simple elevation of the building. As you know, there's been a lot of talk about the sidewalk. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes about this, and then we'll let the county present. They are either required to do a sidewalk or fee in lieu. On this site, this is near the top of their driveway. You can see that the land falls away. There's actually guardrails on either side of the road so that cars won't drive into the creek. Under this kind of vegetation here, there's gabion baskets, which are, these metal baskets full of rock to hold back the bank, and you can't put a sidewalk on top of that. Plus, this is also in the floodway, and this creek does flood a fair bit. Again, moving down the road, you can see that the bank is actually slanting a pretty good amount. And our hope was to get a 10-foot flat multi-use trail on this side for as long as we can. We're still aiming for that, but we have to, because it's in the floodway, we have to minimize the impact to avoid having to do a big flood study and causing a lot of expense. So this is a view up the road. So the current proposal from the county is to put a sidewalk here on the east side along their fence, which the fence would probably need to be moved, but down here, and it would cross the road and then become a 10-foot path. Now, I will say I have gone out to the site several times, and I was out there with one of our engineers and floodway folks. Staff feels like we might be able to cross sooner on that road to get to the other side. It's pretty technical, and we're not sure at this point. We really need to meet on site with all the different disciplines to figure out what the best thing is. So that's just another picture. So for tonight, so what we're proposing is just amending these conditions that were in the staff report. As a part of the construction of the sidewalk, that the county would construct a 6-foot sidewalk and it would, either 218 feet about or a little bit longer. We're asking that if we could write a condition so that gives us staff some flexibility to work with Buncombe County to decide where's the safest place to cross that road. Working with McCray Coates, we think that maybe it could cross before this second driveway, but we also want to work with our traffic engineer to make sure that we're not putting pedestrians at risk, because the crossing would be longer, it would be diagonal. We've got several different drainage structures here in the street, so it's not a simple, straight 90-degree crossing across the street, if that makes sense. So with those revised conditions, I will say, and Mr. Creighton is here, and he will discuss their proposal for a sidewalk. This is what, since I'm talking about it, they had proposed putting a sidewalk all the way down, across the second driveway, and then crossing. So this is where we're saying either the crossing could happen here or maybe here. So somewhere we want to get across this road and safely. And we would love to have a longer, as long as a 10-foot path as we can. So.
Sasha, would that 10-foot path go all the way down to the entrance of the park?
No.
Or
No,
how
so
far
this
would
is
it extend?
So this is approximately where their parcel ends. So they're only obligated to do sidewalk for that 434 feet. You could request them to.
But of course, there's less vehicle traffic beyond that point.
Yes, definitely in terms of trash trucks and waste trucks, there is a fair bit of traffic still for folks going down there to jog or bike or run.
Drop a canoe in, too.
Drop a canoe, exactly. I was there 7:30 this Monday morning, and I was surprised how many vehicles were already down at the park.
Is it in our plan or anybody's plan to put I guess it would be the Greenway plan, to extend a path all the way down to the entrance to the park on that side? Or
it's unclear. So the Buncombe County Greenway plan, and Mr. Creighton might be able to speak to it more than I can, but the Greenway plan calls for a greenway to happen on either side of that creek that would connect the end of Hominy Creek Greenway at Shelburne down to the park. So you have to get across that creek at some point. Either you're crossing at the top or down closer. And then, of course, there is and I should have said this before, there is a proposed greenway that would come over from the farmer's market across that creek. So it's this convergence of three greenways, really. So that concludes my report. I guess I can say really quick, in the report, we think the comprehensive plan and city council goals all fit with this. This project fits with all those goals. And really, the city obviously relies on this transfer station for our public works functions. Thank you.
Do you want an opportunity to speak, or you don't have to? It's not a requirement.
Mayor, council members, I'm John Creighton, I'm Assistant County Manager. And what we'd like to do is basically replace our existing transfer station. It was built in 1980. That was before my time, and I really don't understand why they went into a mechanical system where it's basically you drop it in, you've got a push pit, a ram that pushes it over into another pit, and then it takes it from there, the MSW, and loads it into a truck. Obviously, with almost 40 years of service on all this machinery, the hydraulics and stuff, we're just having a number of issues. Plus, the main issue is, and I think the people that were standing here earlier, being public works people, could tell you that we can only get one truck in at a time. So in those late mornings, late afternoons, everybody backs up. And what we want to basically go to is just a big wide open floor where a solid waste truck backs in, dumps it, and takes off. And we can do multi-trucks at a time. It's just a lot quicker, a lot easier, and we'll go to a top load like Waste Management has over on Pond Road. So I just wanted to run through real quick, if I can. Sasha showed you this picture before. Basically, we're moving the new transfer station over about 135 feet from the existing one towards the river. There was discussion about Antler Village and being able to see this new facility. I think, as you mentioned before, this is about seven feet taller than the existing transfer station. We've got basically a 60, 70 foot buffer with the trees there. The only thing I could see from Antler Village was Duke's administrative offices way up on Brevard Road. We're at the same elevation, so you, like I say, you've got a very tall tree canopy in between us, and you're just not going to see it from there. There was also discussion about from the parking area down the park, could you see the facility? Basically, you've got a very narrow window there to look up through from where the parking area is, and you're really looking over towards the garage. You can't see the existing transfer station because it's basically over to your right more. So it's not visible from there. When you come down the greenway, we're going to be cutting in the garbage, a roadway that will go where our trucks will pull in the bottom. Basically, solid waste gets dumped in the top. So to make that road, we are putting in a berm there on the edge of the existing trees. What I proposed is to take those trees that I couldn't plant on the landfill and put them in 2 locations along the greenway path. And the next one would be over, I've got about a 5-foot retaining wall that holds up that area where you back up, you pull up and back into the facility, and I'll put those other trees there. So the other thing is that we will work with staff to see, there's an area right, like I say, when you get into where that second entrance is to the garage of, okay, how do we cross there and get over to a more of a greenway path than a sidewalk. So we'll work through that. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have from my side.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you. Unless there's anyone else who needs to speak on the presentation side of it, I'm going to open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item?
Hi, I'm Rich Lee. I'm Vice Chair of the City Greenway Committee and a member of the Multimodal Commission. I'm going to surprise you by talking about something I'm actually qualified to today. So we appreciate the work that city staff has done on reaching this point in a compromise. I know Julie lives up the road from here. I lived up the road on Shelburne for a while. And this is a really vital connector for bicyclists and pedestrians and people driving down to the put-in, and a really key part of the Greenway network that will ultimately extend out past the current end of the Hominy Creek Greenway, out the new Caney Creek Greenway, and even out to Patton Avenue in far west Asheville. That'll be a really great connection for a lot of neighbors. So we're excited to see this happen in this compromise. That's all I really wanted to say. The City Greenway Committee is in support of getting the best possible multi-use path on the creek side as far as we can, and making sure that we have the best possible safety at the top entrance where the trucks come in. 500 trucks a day is 1,000 passes. Just during hours of operation, that's more than a truck a minute or thereabouts. I'm not doing that math right, but it's a lot of trucks. So if we can have a good safety at the top and a good path down, a lot of people are going to make use of it, and just more and more every year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? All right, if not, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to approve the conditional zoning request from institutional district to industrial conditional zone with the requested condition for the reduced landscaping, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, and is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the other adopted plans in that one. The site has historically been an industrial use. 2, additional landscaping, and the location serves to largely conceal the facility from adjacent uses in the nearby neighborhood. 3, the facility is integral to the city's solid waste and recycling functions. And 4, the expansion and upgrading of the facility eliminates the need to relocate this use to another part of the community.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any other questions, comments? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you. Do we have a closed session item?
Yes, we
Yes.
do.
Are we ready with the motion?
Do you do it before public comment? You're going to do it before public comment?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
And before the boards and commissions piece. Ready? Okay.
Did we vote on it?
We did.
We did.
You were, all right. Did you want to vote yes or no?
Of course I voted yes. All right, closed session motion. I move that the Asheville City Council go into closed session for the following reasons. 1, to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to the laws of North Carolina or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. The law that makes this information privileged and confidential is North Carolina General Statute 143-318.10A3. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A1. Second, to consult with an attorney employed by the city about matters with respect to which the attorney-client privilege between the city and its attorney must be preserved, including, but not limited to, a lawsuit involving the following parties: Civil Service Board grievance, Richard Grant, City of Asheville versus Robert H. Frost. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A3.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, we will come back out of the closed session approximately 10 till, and we will be in recess till then.
To Civil Service Board.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Alan Coxey would like to be reappointed Chair of the Civil Service Board. Clerk's office spoke with all the members of the Civil Service Board, and Alan was the only one interested, and I propose that Alan Coxey be named the Chair of the Civil Service Board. Again.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay, great. So for the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, we have an opening for the Veterans Administration seat. And normally, for our boards and commissions, we ask that all of our appointments live within the city limits. And the Homeless Advisory Commission, or committee, excuse me, searched for a person that would fit into this Veterans Administration slot that lived within the city, but were unable to do that, and proposed that Allison Bond, who lives in the county, be
I'm sorry.
what?
It's Ms. Lott.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, that's
already on.
who left, sorry. I lost it. Okay, hold on one sec. Whitney Lott, excuse me, be appointed, and she actually lives in the county. So, but but it's a very important position, and so I propose that Whitney Lott be appointed to the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee in the Veterans Administration slot.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So this afternoon, the boards and commissions had a meeting, and we had 2 items on our agenda to talk about CPAC and to talk about the potential of creating a human relations commission. We had several members of the public that attended, several members of CPAC that attended, and there was some great discussion. But we had an hour, and we would like to continue to talk about that. So Boards and Commissions is going to have a special meeting on the 20th, May 20th at 4 o'clock. I'm right, right?
Is that right, Maggie?
It was 4 o'clock. She wasn't here.
But what's the
No, but
special?
the special
This
meeting.
is a special meeting.
It's Monday, the 22nd at 10 a.m.
Oh, 10 a.m., sorry.
In the first floor conference
Conference
room,
room.
if that's available.
Right. And so what will be on the agenda is to talk about CPAC and to talk about the potential of creating the process of creating a human relations commission, as well as to talk about the last item on the agenda, which was, for the neighborhood action fund, which we didn't get to today. So those 3 items will be on the agenda and will be publicly noticed, and we would invite the public to join us if they can.
Is that what we're calling it, Neighborhood Action Fund?
I think Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, okay. And so that's just for information.
Okay.
I'm sorry, was that at 10 o'clock on?
10 o'clock, I'm sorry, on Monday,
May
May
22nd.
22nd. And we'll still go ahead with the regular boards and commission meeting committee meeting that was planned, but we're going to go ahead and talk about these issues in a special meeting.
Does that conclude boards and
That
commissions?
does conclude boards and commissions.
All right, that concludes the printed agenda. I have a number of people signed up to speak, but before we move into that, let me say a couple of things. I've got some folks here that have already indicated they want to yield their time to somebody else to speak. So remember, if you yield your time, you cannot speak during public comment. You're giving your time to somebody else who can speak for up to 10 minutes, so long as there are 3 folks yielding their time. And when you speak here at the lectern, use the small microphone. Just ignore the larger microphone standing next to it. Watch the lights on the lectern. Green means go, orange means you're getting close, and red means stop. The buzzer will sound, and then you need to stop your comments. Also, I noticed on the sign-up sheets that I do have, which isn't required, that there are a number of people that want to speak on items that were on our printed agenda. Council rules don't allow for public comment at the end of the meeting on items that have already been addressed on the agenda. However, because most of them look like they were under presentations where we don't take public comment, we will consider waiving our rules. If someone wants to make a motion to that effect.
I'm happy to make a motion that we waive our rules for public comment.
For tonight?
For tonight.
Second, so I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, all right. Just a little bit of housekeeping there. So, the first person I have signed up to speak is VJ Kapoor. And actually, I numbered these as I received them, so if there was a different order, I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate that. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Thank you for waiving that, by the way. My name is VJ Kapoor, and I live in South Asheville. I own a company that provides municipal budgeting and financial analysis to cities across the country, and I'd like to comment on the city's proposed budget. I reviewed this budget as if I were looking at it for one of the cities that I work with, and this is the guidance that I would give them and that I'm giving you tonight. At the outset, you're asking for a tax increase on the city residents who will likely, as Councilman Smith noted, also see their county taxes raised. This is going to have a big impact on people who are on fixed incomes. Before raising taxes, you owe it to residents to make absolutely sure that the proposed spending is necessary and justified. And there are 3 places in this budget where I have serious concerns. First, the budget document doesn't include the 5-year operating budget projection that's part of the city's operating budget policy noted on page 10. Before approving any budget, City Council and residents need that information to understand how this budget may impact future budgets and tax rates. Currently, all you have is a snapshot. We can't just view this year's budget in isolation. Second, there's not enough information in this budget about how the $25 million in bond proceeds for the affordable housing bond will be spent. Before we borrow this money and start paying interest on it, we need to have a specific plan for its use. And what's on pages 106 and 149 of the budget is not sufficient at all for an expenditure of this size. $25 million is more than what the city spends annually on our Parks and Rec, Public Works, Transportation, and City Manager departments combined. I want to be clear that I don't disagree with the goal or the intent of the bond, but from a budget perspective, this lack of information on specific projects is a red flag. And even tonight, there was discussion among council about whether or not we could use bond proceeds for certain projects. We need to have those nailed down. If we're not ready to go out for this bond, then let's wait until we have a detailed, transparent plan before taxpayers have to start paying interest on it. Third, I want to caution you about immediately authorizing an additional 15 police officers. I work with many cities of Asheville's size, and an increase of this many officers in 1 year is rare. I'm not opposed to hiring more police officers if there is a demonstrated need. But before we allocate additional money to do it and have to raise taxes to pay for it, taxpayers need to know what police department turnover is, whether there are unfilled vacancies, whether there are police officers in the pipeline, and whether there are other current police department resources that the city could redeploy. If we have a turnover problem, then we'll be spending money to train people who walk right out the door. Assuming there is a demonstrated need to hire more police officers, I'd recommend phasing in the hiring over a couple of years rather than all at once to see whether it's having any impact.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
if you have written comments that you can make available, you can hand them to the clerk. The next speaker signed up to speak is Dee Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. City Council, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dee Williams. I'm the chairman of the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee. And I just wanted to bring the problem of disparity squarely back to center. The response does not logically refute the data which the actual police department submitted itself to the SBI database. In other words, the data that we had in front of us was the data the city itself submitted. I was so glad to hear that the department had begun making some changes. Really thrilled about that, and I think that not only the NAACP committee, the Criminal Justice Committee has been instrumental in this, but also Patrick Conant and Ian Mance and all of our coalition partners, and just making sure that this data, which is a public resource, is brought to the attention of the city. One of the things that I wanted to stress also is the fact that data does depersonalize. In other words, we're all racist, biased, or whatever you want to call it, and that's not something we're here to do. We can't solve problems with giving people monikers and so forth. We can use data, though, to pinpoint what problems are. I'm not going to go into a litany of items and read verbatim from what I've written down, the notes that I have. But I do want to say that our duty with the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee is to make our community a place where all people can live. I had a good look at those young people. Those were nice-looking young people when we started this meeting off, and looking at them, I could hardly control myself to think if they were stopped with some of the data that we have here in Asheville because of what they look like or where they come from. And it does show racial disparity. There's no denying that. But one of the things that we can do is take this data. We don't need to personalize it, if you will. It's just data. It informs us if we use it properly. So what I wanted to do is get a commitment from this city council from the mayor, and also from your police department, that they will work in consort with us, that we work together, that we identify common data points, that we even have a workshop to talk about just laying down all of our baggage, our egos, all of that. I don't want to have a kumbaya and talk about race and all of that. That's not the point. The point is to talk about common data points, things that we can agree on, that are pertinent, that are there, tools that we can use. And then we want to talk about using these data points to set benchmarks, to bring these disparities down, to look at best practices. We can do this. We can do it together, and we can become a model. But what I need is a commitment. We all do. We're here, not because of ego or because we want to be recognized, but to solve a problem and hopefully save lives. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Patrick Conan is the next person I have signed up to speak.
Hi, my name's Patrick Conan, and I just wanted to really support a lot of the things Dee said and add some of my thoughts from an open data perspective. I do think that it's worth continuing to monitor not just historical data, but more importantly looking forward to ensure that all traffic stops are being reported. I would love to see the information that APD used to audit their own stops was released publicly, so citizens like myself could look at that to know how that's conducted. Really, I'm looking just for more transparency, a more complete view of the methodology behind that. I do think moving forward, it would be a great step for APD to release reports, as was discussed here, not only to council, but I think it's equally important that it's released to the public. I do think the department's doing a good job of using data in more ways, but at its core, open data, and especially police-related open data, is about improving relationships between the community, trust, and accountability. And if we release that information to the public, that's a critical component to make that happen. Like Dee, I do think we are making some progress towards working in a more collaborative environment, and I'm personally more than willing to do whatever it takes to help these efforts move forward, because I enjoy working with public data. I think this is a very important issue in our community, and I think we need to continue to look at this and see it through, not just to look at where we stand now, but just to provide an assurance to the public that moving forward, we can catch any issues that come up early on. It's not something that we have to look back at 5 years and say, how did we miss that? And I really think that this applies not just to police data, but all kinds of city efforts. Increased transparency can allow us to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person I have signed up to speak is Ian Mance, and I have that 3 people are ceding their time. Lauren, I can't say your last name. Okay. Jesse, and Leslie. Okay. This means that Ian can speak for up to 10 minutes. It's not required that you speak for 10 minutes, but up to 10 minutes.
The whole 10.
Okay.
I've been Xing out parts of my... So I did receive a number of calls and emails yesterday asking me for my response to Asheville PD's report, and specifically to the portions that push back on parts of my presentation a couple weeks ago. I mainly want to respond to the section about data compliance, which the report devotes the most time to. The report disputes that there could still be compliance issues in terms of reporting, and also gives the impression that I didn't cooperate with the department in evaluating this claim. The day after the last meeting, I got a call from one of the department's analysts. We had what I thought was a very productive conversation. We spoke for nearly an hour. He asked me to take him through the process that we had used to develop the information that we presented at the last meeting, and I did that. And after the call, I emailed ACES reports of some of the traffic stops that we had run through the database to illustrate how we'd arrived at the conclusion that the stops weren't being reported. Although I did learn this morning, as Councilman Bothell had said, that that email was not seen. I also offered during our call to meet with the department, and that offer, remains open, and do an audit side by side with them. And I invited them to call me back if they encountered any issues or had any further questions. I know that the department has taken issue with us putting a number on the rate of underreporting, and The point that I was really trying to make when I was here last time was not so much about the actual rate of underreporting, because I think that it's difficult to determine with accuracy from the outside looking in exactly what that rate might be. My point was more about whether or not the department had proper mechanisms in place to ensure that it was capturing all of its traffic stops. After I got the report this weekend, I took an additional step yesterday of trying to further verify some of these stops that showed up as unreported in the database, and called some of the people who were issued citations. I only reached 2 of the 20 that I called, but I did speak to a woman yesterday who was pulled over for a seatbelt violation in January that would be required to be reported under the law, that did not show up in the database. I do think, it's not a perfect method, but I do think that we're using the best method available to us given the limitations of the public records. There certainly are citations that would give every appearance of a traffic stop that should be reported, but for reasons that wouldn't be evident on the face of the ticket might be exempt from the reporting requirement. But I would really dispute this idea that there's not any evidence to support these concerns about underreporting. The fact that reported searches could drop so dramatically from more than 1,200 to less than 200, and the department has said that there has not been a conscious effort to bring the searches down, I think reasonably raises an inference that there might be missing data. The department's report did acknowledge that 2 data reports, as has been discussed tonight, months apart, resulted in more than 1,300 traffic stops not appearing in the database, and this is the first acknowledgement of that I was aware of. And that was detected by comparing the month-by-month numbers. It wasn't an issue of the monthly report not being submitted at all. There's never, as far as I can tell, there's never been a month where the department reported 0 traffic stops to the SBI, but there have been times where not all the stops that occurred during that period were reported. And so moving forward, I think that making a similar sort of comparison on a day-by-day basis might be helpful, and it might be a better way of thinking about and in evaluating this underreporting issue. The report says that since last July, there's been 100% reporting accuracy rate in traffic stops. It actually says, I think, 102%. And I understand that there are 3 divisions of 8 officers on duty at a given time, with a supervisor in each division, 2 shifts a day, which is roughly 50 officers per workday. And I know that most officers are not assigned to work traffic enforcement, but that there is a traffic enforcement division within the department. On January 26th of this year, the department reported 81 traffic stops. But on January 7th, that same month, it reported 2 for the entire department. And that's a very significant day-to-day difference within the same month. We know that in North Carolina, the majority of police-citizen interactions occur in the course of traffic stops. So 2 stops in a city of 80,000 people does seem low. The previous January, there were 4 different days where the entire department reported making just 1 stop or making no stops at all. Last year, there were 21 different days where the entire department reported making 5 or less traffic stops citywide. And that's stops, that's not citation. The law requires officers to report, quote, whether or not a citation or warning was issued. I think that it's important to keep in mind when reading this report that the data that the department is using for purposes of the report can only account for traffic stops that individual officers themselves report to the department. So when the report says 102% compliant, what it means is that of all the traffic stops that police management, who are responsible for putting together these reports, are aware of, 102% or 100% have been reported to the SBI. But particularly if there's no citation written, it would be very difficult for the department to know for sure whether there's a traffic stop that went underreported, absent the unlikely event that a motorist and one who got off without a ticket took the time to call and tell them about it. That the reporting system is very much an honor system. So I would question whether on days when the department is reporting 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 stops for the entire department, I would question whether that is an accurate reflection of the entirety of police activity in that day. And I do think it bears further review, particularly when the department has admitted there was some pretty significant underreporting issues in the fairly recent past. I also had just a brief thing to say about written consent, which is that while the department is right that the video gives a better account of what transpires in a police encounter than a written form can, I don't think that that is a reason not to adopt a written consent to search policy. The issue is really about whether people who grant consent to search adequately understand that the choice is theirs to make. Giving them something in writing, advising them of their rights, helps to eliminate the ambiguities that can arise when an officer who wants the person to grant consent puts the question to them. If you watch some of these videos of these traffic stops, you'll sometimes see officers say things, use double negatives and say things like, "You don't mind, do you, if I take a look in your car?" And then the person will say yes, and it's not entirely clear, did they mean, yes, I do mind, or yes, you may look in my car. And a written consent form can help clarify that. There's also the issue of the new body camera law that some of you have discussed that Governor McCrory signed that makes video more difficult to obtain. And I've talked to a few public defenders in the last week or two, not here in Buncombe, but in another county, who've told me that they've had to clear more hurdles already just to get a copy of the footage, and that it's not always available to them at their first appearance. As I wrap up, I did want to say that the news in the report that the department is shifting away from citations for regulatory stops and towards warnings, I think is really encouraging. And it's not exactly what we had recommended, but I do think that the department deserves credit for moving in that direction and for being responsive to concerns that people in the community have raised. And I'm also very encouraged to hear that they're going to start collecting locational data, and I think that it'll take a while, but that will give us a really valuable additional piece of information. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next person I have signed up to speak is Catherine Carr. Carr, am I saying it right?
Close enough, it's Carr.
Okay, and I have that 3 people are yielding their time. Camille McCarthy, back there. And you can pull that. Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to.
Last name Mustafa. Say it again? Okay, you got to be here to yield your time. So, and Samantha White, you're here. So 3 minutes for this one since we only have 2 yielding their time.
Okay, give me 1 second if you would, because at first you said we couldn't comment on the budget today, and that's what I was commenting on, so I X'd out all of my stuff.
Oh, no, we took a vote to allow.
Well, I know, after I X'd out my entire speech and added a whole bunch of Post-it notes, and now I have a missing person, so I have to figure out where I can start from in 3 minutes. Okay. All this number stuff and budget stuff I'm starting now is great, and budgets are important, and data is important, and money is important. However, as a new resident here in Asheville, I recently became involved in coming to city council meetings and CPAC meetings, and there is a really deep problem here that goes above and beyond $1 million for the police department, adding money to the police department budget for more policing. So basically, what I would like to say is that what I've observed is the actions or lack of action taken by the City Council, Chief Hooper, and the Asheville Police Department have contributed to a complete breakdown between yourselves and the communities of people you work for. This includes absences at committee and council meetings, postponed agenda items, terse interactions with members of our community, zero community policing, and so on. The African American community, if I can speak, has lost trust and faith in the very institutions that exist solely to serve, protect, and advocate on their behalf. You're not losing the trust, you've lost the trust. It's gone. It's been too many years, too many dead loved ones at the hands of those sworn to serve and protect, and this is not exclusive to Asheville, it's nationwide. I've lived in Philly, I've lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in Washington, D.C. I just moved here from Atlantic Beach. This is everywhere. Asheville Police Department has 21st century policing. They have body cameras, they have vehicle cameras, they have ITAC training, complete. I even read about robots and SWAT teams for Asheville. You're already very 21st century. What you lack is community policing. Honest, genuine attempts at rebuilding trust and nurturing relationships. Chief Hooper talks about nurturing relationships as part of her 21st century policing plan. There are no nurturing relationships that I could find at AshevilleNC.gov. She did mention a community police policy work group. Couldn't find it anywhere. I have no idea what that is. But the only genuine attempt was a 6-week plan back in January where a police officer would go to Southside for an hour and break bread and talk and have a great time and rebuild that trust. And it was a great plan and there was some success. In his response to Sir Charles Gardner, when he mentioned more guns, more heroin, same old thing every week, every month, what are you going to do about it? His response was, maybe we should try that again.
Thank you.
Maybe you should. Thank you.
The next person I have signed up to speak is Sydney Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Manheimer and members of the council. My question concerns only the city's accounting system, and in anticipation of the city's upcoming approval, potential approval of a property tax increase to pay the interest and principal on the $74 million in bonds that are anticipated, and the millions of additional revenues that the city will be receiving. I looked at the budget, the current budget that's in existence, to see if there were indeed a separate debt service fund as required by law that's maintained by the city of Asheville, and my concern was because it indicated that there was no debt service fund. There is none at this time. That what there is, it's commingled or it's placed into the city's general fund. And so I addressed a question to all of you, which was as follows: as to those taxes specifically levied and collected to service its bond indebtedness, does the city of Asheville maintain in its accounting system a debt service fund into which such tax revenues are deposited, maintained, and accounted for? And I attached a copy of the North Carolina law, which I believe requires that such a separate escrow fund be maintained. I was informed this evening by one of the media reporters that I missed the presentation that was made for the budget. I understand now that the city will be establishing a debt service fund in accordance with the state law.
I believe it's already established, but we will have our city manager and city attorney provide that information to you in response to your inquiry that we received.
And I've already sent a letter to your attorney addressing this question yesterday, so if you check with Mr.
This was not anything to do with the current bond litigation. It had to do with where is the money being placed that was being to be accounted for the bond issues. It has nothing to do with any of the facts that were raised in the litigation. So I'd appreciate it if you'd send me a copy of that letter, because Mr. Sneed is currently unavailable.
Okay.
Thank you. So anyway, I noticed that you all did respond to the letter, and there is now a debt service fund specifically.
There already has been. It was established in 2012, if I read
Well,
Barbara's
that is
paper.
not what is in the budget. It shows
So maybe
the
that
debt
is-
service is part of the general fund. It doesn't show it as a separate fund. It's part of the general fund, and that is what was told me by the local government commission in Raleigh, confirmed that the city of Asheville does not have a separate debt service fund. It was commingled in the general fund, and that raised some concerns, as if you're putting all these millions of new revenues into a general fund, the city administration can spend it on anything they want. It's not earmarked. And I think that kind of revenue has to be earmarked for the purpose intended. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Darlene, and I can't read the handwriting very well, but maybe Azarmi? Sorry. Okay. Oh, that's an R. Okay.
Thank you for hearing us speak this evening. My name's Darlene Azarmi. You got it right. I'm a resident of Oakley. I'm a community organizer for Democracy North Carolina here in Asheville. Work with the Racial Justice Coalition as well as the NAACP. And I'm just here to speak in support of the no-cost policy solutions that have been presented to y'all at the last meeting and again tonight. I view the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, which Ian Mance is with, as a strong coalition partner of Democracy North Carolina, and I really appreciate him continually coming all the way up here to do what I think is helping us take on and address the issues of implicit bias in a very efficient way, and I hope that we can move towards doing that. So I appreciate what one member of council said when they said that written consent doesn't mean that everyone isn't bullied, and I echo the ask that can we make this mandatory? So doing this, making written consent searches mandatory would clear up ambiguities between probable cause and officers' discretionary suspicions. I personally applaud the APD for adopting body cameras, but to mention them as a measure that could potentially invalidate or dilute the need for written consent is perplexing to me. The body cameras have not been fully rolled out yet, although, which means that we can't use their eventual deployment as a legitimate reason to wait on making a decision about mandating written consent for searches. Equipment can malfunction and video can be lost. It's my understanding that body cameras can be turned off by officers, which could be another space for exploring best practice policy. Disputing issues of they said, I say in court is intimidating to everyday people. Likewise, reviewing video as evidence with a police chief alone. I believe it makes most sense to instate a best practice based on the precautionary principle approach, to mandate written consent searches to be used in tandem with body cameras. So I ask that you all support that. I ask that the City Council direct the City Manager to direct or work with the Police Department on this policy immediately. It was also mentioned that the written consent form may be confusing to some people. That could even be rewritten to be at more of a the fourth grade reading level. It was said that the institutional review board is something that's done in that way. That is accessible to folks. And also in the APD report, there was a statement that deprioritizing regulatory stops would not be prohibited, but it's not something that they pursue. I'm aware that these policies have passed, and I think 4 other cities in North Carolina, specifically Durham, I think would be the most similar to Asheville. But anyways, they actually send tickets to folks without pulling them over. And so that could be done, I'm not sure if that could be done with warnings. I don't know if warnings require that people be pulled over, but I would just like to mention that that could be another thing in that area. So that was all. Just was asking you all to please fully consider and support these policies. Again, they're no cost. So thank you.
That is all I have in terms of who has signed up to speak. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Yes. Ronnie, okay, work it out. Okay.
Hi there. My name is Ashley Cooper. Thank you, Mayor and council members, for being here. I don't envy your job of working at such a systemic level on so many small details, sitting here and all that you hold in your heads. And yet also you have the opportunity to see the patterns that are showing up in all these different areas. And we're seeing incredible racial and economic disparities in our city, within the police department, within our education system, within every housing. And so it just makes me wonder, if we look at best practices about what helps to solve these problems, it's by working with those who are most impacted. I've worked on equity and inclusion efforts with another city that's a similar scale size as ours. And what I'm seeing from our city is that we outsource everything. The consultant to hire the equity and inclusion manager, that's a California firm doing that hiring, that there aren't people. It just makes me wonder, do you have the relationships and the understanding of the brilliance that it is in this community? The people that are on the ground spending day to day dealing with these inequities are geniuses. There are strategic thinkers, there are people with strong solutions. I hear them speaking at these meetings to y'all, and yet there's constantly money going not to our community, but to solve the problems of those on the ground. Ms. Williams mentioned the inspiration seeing the Kayla folks up here today, and I've worked with those Kayla students, and when they had to identify the 7 top issues that need focus, police profiling was one of their issues. They have extreme solutions. I've listened to middle schoolers come with ideas about what they're facing from their Black middle school students, their experience living in Asheville in their skin, talking to CPAC meetings. I just want to really challenge Vice Mayor. You made a joke kind of underhand about not being the one weeding, And I'm like you, like I'm not in the garden and I don't weed, but I am a systemic thinker and I know what it's like to find where are the weeds in our systems that we need to be tending to. And the fact that we are outsourcing and not giving money directly to those who know what this community needs, that's a weed in our community. And that, like a lot of the comments that were made tonight, I really appreciate about more transparency around, you know, having those audits that the APD is doing, have that information, make it so it can become public, making more of what's happening transparently available shows that there's an investment in building the relationships with those who are on the ground doing the work. But doing everything behind closed doors and, yeah, we're spending money and we can show you the things that we're spending money on, spending money doesn't cause to changes in communities. So if we're needing data, ask the communities that are impacted, what is the data that they think should be collected? And then start collecting that data. How are we measuring, great that implicit bias is happening and de-escalation, that's really important, but how are we measuring the actual changes in these officers? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? I think, Rondell, you were.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, first I'm kind of aggravated because I left, went to PAX, then I hear, well, they changed the rules. Knowing the rules, coming here for so long, and having people here to speak, then all of a sudden, at the last minute, you changed the rules. So I finished eating and come running over here. They changed the rules, and so I kind of feel at a disadvantage because of that. But that's your prerogative, I understand that, and I'm just saying. But it's funny to sit there and see how terrible and how bad the Asheville Police Department is. How bad the men and women at the Asheville Police Department are. It's no wonder they're leaving 2 or 3 a month. It's no wonder that detective office is down now 50%, that they are no longer working all cases. The misdemeanor cases going to the officers on patrol. They don't have enough people in CID. They're supposed to have training this week. I was going to help, but they said we can't have training. We don't have the men and women to work the street. We're so short. I don't blame them. Why would anybody want to come and work for a police department that's as bad as it is, as you've heard tonight? Why would anybody? I would encourage anybody, do not come work for the Asheville Police Department. Stay away. And the officers that are working the street, and I've had sergeants tell me this, these officers are pulling in a parking lot, sitting, not doing anything. I don't blame you. Do it. Park. Just go when you get a call, come back and park. That's, since 1993, we have been mandated, we have been paid thousands of dollars by Asheville Housing Authority to be in the minority community in these complexes since 93. Some officers are making $7,000 a year because housing complex said, we need help. And since 93, I've worked it. They'd have 12 officers a night inside the minority community, stopping cars, do whatever you can. We had people from 5 counties coming over here buying dope. We had open air drug markets. Even now we have a housing team. All they do is spend time in the housing complexes. You have officers who are told spend an hour a day inside a housing complex. We've been told since 93 by the Housing Authority, spend time in these neighborhoods. And you would think, surely it's changed since 93, but I was at CPAC, you know what their complaint was? What's the police going to do? The shootings are up in the housing complexes, drug overdoses up in the housing complexes. Look what happened in the last 3 days. We had a shooting, we had 3 ODs. Last year the chief presented the budget. Number 1 crime was downtown, number 2 was Pisgah View, Hillcrest, Beaverview, then Walmart. So tell me what we're doing wrong. I say community, you're doing wrong. City council, you're doing wrong. Somebody needs to be in these neighborhoods. Police are easy to blame. You're putting the blame on us. They're still shooting, they're still doing dope, they're still ODing, and you want to blame the police for it. These men and women are out there, they know the law. We're scrutinized. Everything we stop, it goes to court, the judge looks at it, the DA looks at it, the defense attorneys look at it. We're scrutinized every way we go. And for the city council to sit up here and act like the Supreme Court, well, you can't make this stop, you can't make that. Filling out paperwork, how easy would that be to, yeah, he signed this, no I didn't, yeah he did. That don't do nothing, signing a paperwork consent. I could forge them all day long. You've got to be realistic. You've got to sit and talk with people that's been out here on the streets, that's been here in these housing complexes since 93 and been told to be there and write tickets and stop cars or you're not going to work it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, thank you. That concludes our public comment. And News and announcements? Yeah.
So, first of all, thanks for everybody for everything tonight. But we have a lot of instances where, from this dais, we are asking members of the community to please reach out to the legislature to stand up for Asheville and to advocate for something, or advocate against something horrible that's happening in Raleigh. So, I wanted to take opportunity to say that one of our nearby Republican legislators is leading a very positive charge. Later this week, the Raise the Age bill, co-sponsored by Representative Chuck McGrady, will be going before the North Carolina House. And this is something that a lot of us are behind, and I just wanted to applaud Representative McGrady for doing this big, important thing worth doing.
And this council has adopted it. And this council has adopted a resolution supporting that bill, so hopefully it'll happen this time.
I got something that's going to happen before the next meeting. We declared Endangered Species Day today, and generally support the environment. I volunteer at the Nature Center. There's a new group in town called Appalachian Wild. That's a new organization that rehabilitates wildlife. They're having a fundraiser on the 21st. That's Sunday at the Smoky Park Supper Club. It's free admission. There'll be a lot of paintings for sale. There'll be a jazz band there. Come out and support the people who are taking care of the injured wildlife here.
I just want to share with council, on Friday, I traveled down to Chapel Hill to the School of Government, their first ever workshop on boards and commissions. And I look forward to sharing that information back with our boards and commissions about the evaluation and assessment of all our boards and commissions across the board there, and providing some in-depth information on what I learned there and how our class as a guinea pig class will help formulate best practices across the state.